ADSW has been leading the climate action conversation for the past 15 years, and we're delighted to bring you together for the start of 2023 for the first major sustainability gathering in advance of COP28. We have a very busy 2 days together. We're going to have big conversations, bold conversations, and indeed, I hope we will have brave conversations. So there's so much to be done as we all have to deliver more focused strategy, deeper compassion and commitment with unwavering speed. So let's get started. For our opening welcome address, I want you to join me and give a very warm welcome to the stage the Director General and Special Representative to the COP28 President UAE, His Excellency Majid Al Suwaidi.
Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, Executive Secretary, distinguished delegates, it's my great honor to welcome you to Abuظbي today, to Sustainability Week Summit, at the start of a pivotal year for global climate action. Last week, the UAE formally launched our COP28 presidency, announcing a strong and diverse team to drive progress forward. His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, a man I've had the privilege of working with for many years, will bring decades of experience to the role of COP President. Having helped lead the UAE's own transition to clean energy and having supported over 70 countries around the world to accelerate their transitions too. We're also lucky to have Her Excellency Shamma Al-Mazrou'i, the UAE's Minister of Youth Affairs, who will serve as our youth climate champion, engaging with young people around the world to bring their insights and priorities to the very heart of COP28. And Her Excellency Razan Al-Mubarak will also draw upon her enormous experience as President of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature to mobilize both the private sector and civil society to address the climate crisis and the nature crisis as two sides of the same coin. This is a proactive, pragmatic, and progressive team who will share the same determination to get the job done and make COP28 a real turning point for global climate action. And as they assume their roles, they will have the full backing and support not only of the entire UAE leadership, but of the entire UAE nation. Because COP28 is quite simply one of the greatest responsibilities our country has ever undertaken. And our collective ambition and commitment to its success could not be higher. We're acutely aware of just how much is at stake at this critical year of this critical decade. Last year, from the catastrophic floods in Pakistan to the drought in the Horn of Africa, to the cyclones in the Pacific and the hurricanes in the Caribbean, we saw the devastating clarity how great a toll climate change is already taking. Every one of us can see the terrible costs and consequences of climate change, but what we need to be just as widely acknowledged are the tremendous benefits and opportunities of climate action. Because as the world grapples with a series of complex economic challenges, whether it's looming global recession or spiraling global debt, there will be some who are tempted now to delay on their commitments to climate action. But it would be a grave error to take our foot off the accelerator and slow down climate action at precisely the moment when we need it most, both to deliver for our planet and succeed in that all-important global goal of limiting climate change to 1.5 degrees. And at the same time, to deliver for our economies and spur a new wave of growth, jobs, and opportunities to propel us through the difficult economic headwinds we face. So as COP28 President, the UAE is calling on the whole world to remember that not only is the scientific case for climate action clear, but so too is the economic case. And the UAE can testify to this from our own direct experience. We have spent the last 2 decades diversifying our economy and turning our nation into a powerhouse of clean energy. Where once the prosperity of our nation was dependent on oil and gas, today over 70% of our national GDP comes from other sectors and revenues. We have seen the jobs, opportunities, and benefits our energy transition is bringing to our citizens and residents alike. And it is now one of the UAE's most profoundly held convictions that climate action is not only the world's greatest responsibility, it's also our greatest opportunity. Our mission at COP28 is to unlock that opportunity in every country on every continent. To date, too many countries in the global south have been unable to access the finance, the technology, and the support to implement climate solutions at anywhere near the scale and pace so urgently needed. Whether to cut emissions, to adapt to climate change, or to react to its impacts, this is what all countries of the world must unite now to change. And at COP28, as we conduct the world's first ever global stocktake, we'll have perhaps the greatest political opportunity of this decade to take stock and, more importantly, to take the action we need, both to meet the climate commitments of the Paris Agreement and to drive forward global development, to lift millions of people out of poverty into a healthier, safer, and more prosperous future. This is our opportunity to help countries leapfrog development fueled by oil and gas and to power a new era of prosperity built on clean, sustainable energy. Distinguished delegates, this is the world's chance to write the great economic growth story of the 21st century. That's the level of ambition that the UAE is bringing to our COP28 presidency. And we'll be counting on the support of everyone here today and across the world, whether from government, the private sector, or civil society, to work with us every step of the way to make COP28 a milestone moment on the path to a better future for everyone, everywhere. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency Majid Al Suwaidi, thank you so much, and good luck with all the great work ahead of you. And indeed, as you said, we all have a huge responsibility ahead, but a tremendous opportunity. And we're going to be exploring that right throughout the rest of the afternoon and indeed tomorrow. So we have so much to discuss. But now it is time for our presidential address. And we're very happy to have with us the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan. So please give a very, very warm welcome for His Excellency Kassym-Jomart Tokayev.
Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan for hosting this very important event. Addressing sustainable development towards a cleaner and greener future is our common task. I am pleased to join all the distinguished guests here at Abu Dhabi's Sustainability Week. Today's topic is truly of global importance. It's safe to say that with greater geopolitical volatility and energy insecurity, the climate agenda has, to our common frustration, taken a back seat. As global temperatures rise, yields for the world's most essential crops, providing over 66% of the world's calories, could substantially decrease. There is also a serious risk of freshwater scarcity. According to a UN report, more than 5 billion people could suffer water shortages by 2050 due to climate change. Eventually, it can undermine the worldwide food, energy, urban, and ecological systems. All these require urgent and effective action, and not only policy action. To save our planet, we need financial investments at greater levels than we have ever seen. At the same time, climate action cannot come at the expense of development or modernization. They must go hand in hand. Therefore, we look to the international community to scale up its commitment to greater meaningful climate finance. That's why today's meeting is so important. Kazakhstan has a strong long-term commitment to carbon neutrality. In fact, our country was among the first ones to ratify the Paris Agreement. Since then, we have formulated ambitious yet sensible policies and national goals that support the diversification of the economy and advance renewable energies and sustainable technologies. Considering that almost 70% of our electricity is generated by coal, we have to implement truly significant structural changes in the country's industry and in economy. Firstly, our new environmental code provides incentives to industrial corporations for a major energy transition. Full amounts of the company's qualifying investments into ecological modernization are deductible from environmental payments to the budget. On the regulatory side, this year we are drafting a set of industrial standards, best available techniques for all major industries. In the next stage, 50 largest corporations accounting for 80% of the total pollution will be required to switch to these standards. Secondly, Kazakhstan was the first country in Central Asia to adopt a long-term strategy for achieving carbon neutrality. Our strategy will provide optimal pathway to achieve the nationally determined contributions. In addition, the national emissions trading system has already proved to be an effective mechanism for stimulating changes in both emissions reduction and energy efficiency technologies. Our overall goal is to bridge the gap between the national and European emissions trading systems. All these measures will ensure that the commitments of the Paris Agreement are fulfilled by 2030. Thirdly, Kazakhstan is steadily developing renewable and alternative energy. The abundance of wind and sun, as well as our large land area, can make Kazakhstan a leader in this sector, able to contribute to global climate efforts. In this regard, we are improving the regulatory environment, creating the most attractive conditions for investors. In general, according to our plans, by 2035, Kazakhstan will add 6.5 gigawatts of renewable energy. Another promising area is green hydrogen. International experts believe that our country can become one of the 10 largest hydrogen exporters. Fourth, one of the important factors in reducing greenhouse gas emissions is the use of nuclear energy. Kazakhstan has a competitive advantage in the domain of nuclear energy, which the EU has included in its list of green technologies. Our country ranks first globally in natural uranium production. We produce nuclear fuel components domestically and have appropriate capabilities for further promotion of safe and secure use of atomic energy. We believe that this is a promising area for both trade and investment on a regional and global levels. Fifth, in Kazakhstan, we believe that forestation is a vital part of the climate strategy. To that end, at COP26 Climate Summit, Kazakhstan joined the Declaration on Forests and Land Use. Domestically, we launched a large-scale project to plant 2 billion trees throughout the country by 2025. Last year, 282 million trees were planted, and 410 million are planned for this year. 6. Kazakhstan, as the world's 7th largest grain producer, is committed to utilizing its agricultural potential to fight global food insecurity. We are actively cooperating with the World Food Programme and the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization to provide wheat flour as humanitarian assistance to the Afghan people. In this context, I encourage active use of partnerships such as the Islamic Organization for Food Security to help ensure food security, especially in developing countries. So once again, I urge all countries to intensify actions to implement green projects, mobilize ESG investments, and achieve sustainable development goals. Thank you very much for your attention.
And indeed, a great word of thanks. Thank you so much to the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Mr. Tokayev. Thank you so much for your wonderful speech there and for bringing us up to date with what is going on in your country and all of the great initiatives that are happening. We're now going to take a look at what's happening in the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. And we're very happy now to be able to present to you our Prime Ministerial address. We're going to look at pioneering the possible, Ethiopia's green transition solution in the world. So please give a very warm welcome to the Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, His Excellency Abiy Ahmed. We're very happy you're with us, sir. Thank you so much.
Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, invited guests and participants of the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Summit. At the outset, I would like to express my gratitude to His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President of the United Arab Emirates and ruler of Abu Dhabi, for inviting me to participate in the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Summit. I am immensely grateful for the warm hospitality accorded to me and my delegation since our arrival to this beautiful city. I would also like to congratulate the government of the United Arab Emirates and its people for successfully hosting the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, leading to COP28. Indeed, the summit and the activities throughout the week are building blocks for getting united on climate action toward COP28. On November 15, 2022, according to United Nations estimates, the world population passed the 8 billion mark. By 2030, when most of the Sustainable Development Goals are set to be achieved, it is expected that our global population will reach 8.6 billion. A rapidly increasing population is placing greater demands on natural resources. We are also witnessing related increases in emissions of climate-changing greenhouse gases. The well-being of our and that of future generations requires us to unite and generate innovative response to the effect of climate change. Ethiopia is the second most populous country in Africa after Nigeria. And it's also the fastest growing economy. While it has been reliant heavily on agriculture for many decades, my government has recently launched a new 10-year development plan. This plan aims to sustain economic growth while facilitating the shift towards a more private sector-driven, competitive, resource-efficient, and climate-resilient industrial economy. Our homegrown economic reform program, which prioritizes agriculture, manufacturing, mining, tourism, and ICT as key pillars of economic progression, is underpinned by the principle of sustainable growth. Ethiopia's inclusive prosperity agenda is anchored in enabling decent livelihoods, building resilience, and setting a green foundation for generations to come. At the moment, however, Ethiopia is one of many developing nations that are vulnerable to climate change. Considering this vulnerability, we are cognizant of the pressing need for climate change adaptation across all sectors in Ethiopia. Although we are at the mercy of high emitters, we are nevertheless committed to do our part. In this regard, Ethiopia has developed its long-term net zero and climate resilient 2050 strategy, which will enhance our ability to plan for decarbonization of the economy. The strategy outlines ambitious scenarios in priority sectors which will contribute to making the country's economy more innovative and sustainable. The development pathway, for example, includes an energy transition towards low carbon and resilience, transport sector decarbonization, and modernizing the agriculture sector through climate resilient and low carbon practices. Ethiopia is also blessed with abundant renewable energy resources and entirely generates electricity from hydroelectric, wind, solar, and geothermal sources. While we have been making progress in effectively tapping into this energy potential, we still have more room and opportunities for growth. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in 2019, Ethiopia launched a practical action through the Green Legacy Initiative that, within 4 years, mobilized over 25 million Ethiopians across the nation to plant 25 billion seedlings. This is equivalent to 250 seedlings per Ethiopian, and the impact could be equated to removing 64 million gasoline-powered cars from the roads for a whole year. We are committed. Thank you. Thank you. We are committed to living a sustainable and climate-resilient Ethiopia for the new generation. Doing so entails taking bold action now and instilling a green culture as we go along. The Green Legacy Initiative, therefore, is our bold action which has created national awareness on climate change, enabled the creation of green jobs, and is making a positive impact on our surrounding environment. A sustainable future is predicted on the commitment of a nation to collectively and inclusively realize such a future. Today, Ethiopia's Green Legacy Initiative is the most extensive afforestation and reforestation program next to the Amazon. Our initiative will certainly contribute towards removing the equivalent of hundreds of millions of tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and reduce deforestation. This implies Ethiopia's significant contribution to the global climate change mitigation efforts. Partnerships are, of course, crucial in sustaining these wins, as are they in manifesting the full potential of our climate-resilient strategy. Ethiopia's multifaceted cooperation with the United Arab Emirates continues to be strengthened in many sectors. The government of Ethiopia and UAE have a strategic partnership that aims to bolster trade and investment between the two countries. As Ethiopia looks to unlock its vast resources and assets through investment, we are inspired by UAE's success in building institutions that bring the best of global good practices for rigor and accountability. As such, the strategic investment arm of the government of Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Investment Holdings, is working closely with multiple institutional investors of the UAE to explore opportunities in Ethiopia across renewable energy, real estate, and agriculture, to name a few. This bilateral engagement has the potential to serve as a model for catalytic partnership between developing and developed countries for mutual betterment. Our partnership rooted in trust, respect, and a mutual growth aspiration is bearing many fruits. I have no doubt that it will continue and expand. I thank you.
Your Excellency, Prime Minister from Ethiopia, thank you so much again for bringing us up to date with what's happening in your country. And indeed, congratulations on all of those initiatives. You talk about partnership. This is what we need to hear from all of the countries, and of course here in the UAE. I know they're always happy to advise, to help, and to make sure that they can empower all of the countries here. But it is that spirit of cooperation, it's that spirit of working together that is absolutely essential. We heard it in the address this morning from His Excellency Dr. Sultan. We have so much that has to be done here, and we've heard it from our other presidents and all of our people here today. It is that collective spirit that will actually make this work, and every country must take the initiatives. And I think to hear the wonderful work you're doing in Ethiopia, again, a tremendous example for many of the other countries in the region, and what works there can hopefully work in so many other places. We're now going to take a look at a vision for COP and really examine this in more detail. Again, from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, the Executive Secretary joins us, so please give a very warm welcome for Simon Steele. He is with us here today. Thank you so much, Simon. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Thank you. Friends, colleagues, what a pleasure it is to be here with you in the UAE. I want to talk to you today about unique opportunities. But before I get into that, I must begin my remarks by giving a special mention to the UAE COP28 team. Our UNFCCC team has been on the ground working with the incoming presidency team. The drive and ambition I have seen thus far has been spectacular. This will build on the courage of the COP27 team, which brought us to this critical point. I'm personally excited to see how we can work together to take strategy to delivery this year. The UAE sits in the heart of a region dramatically impacted by climate change, one which cannot afford anything less than a total transformation of business as usual. Repeating Dr. Sultan's words from his first speech as incoming COP president, COP28 will transform systems and accelerate 2030 trajectories through game-changing partnerships, solutions, and outcomes. We need everybody at the table to achieve this. Everybody. Let me be frank. The only way we're going to get every sector, particularly those hard to abate, aligned with 1.5 is by having those with the expertise engaged and supporting us to drive the change, with the in-depth knowledge and experience they have. This is what will bring us to a renewable, energy-powered, resilient future. The UAE has that expertise. This is a unique opportunity. I know our climate community will be eagerly watching too. Since 2015, we have known that COP28 was going to be a momentous one. The world's first global stocktake is a moment of truth. It must tell us where we are, where we need to go, and how we'll get there. This is not just another synthesis report. This is a moment in history. I want the history books to read 2023 was the year the world stopped dithering and the paradigm shift happened. The GST must be a tool which gives us a roadmap, one which could guide us sector by sector, region by region, actor by actor, on what surgical interventions must take place to align ourselves with a resilient 1.5-degree world. It must speak to where further action is required in a practical and usable way. We're far enough away from the COP that I can ask you to attempt a new challenge this year. Before you put on your negotiating hats, whether that be for a government, company, or institution, spend some time being philosophical. What does the world really need? How can we present what it needs in a practical and usable form? The GST won't deliver simply because it's a date on the calendar, a technical obligation, but because we choose to rise to the challenge of the great opportunity for accelerated action that is offered. My challenge to everyone in this room is to envisage the most ambitious political outcome we need to see for the global stocktake. How can we use the global stocktake as a global reset to course correction? I don't want to hear what's the bare minimum we need to do. This is a unique opportunity. COP28 will also bring home crucial work on several long-awaited deliverables as well. Achieving a global goal on adaptation, hammering out the details of the loss and damage finance facility, driving towards a global goal on finance, accelerating both an energy and a just transition, closing the massive emissions gap, and work in many other areas. This will be no small feat. As I said at the end of COP27, we in the Secretariat, as custodians of the process, will be looking into how we can do things differently. Where we can, and where I have promised, the UNFCCC Secretariat will be leaning in to support the parties, providing technical expertise and generating suggestions for discussion. The COPs themselves are just one milestone in our annual calendar. All actions between COPs must be strategically aligned to lay the groundwork now for what is needed this year and what 2030 necessitates. The slashing of emissions across the board, transforming all sectors towards a renewable and low emissions future, and repurposing a global financial system that supports this transition. Speaking directly to non-state actors and civil society, we need to engage now more than ever. We want a process fit for purpose that enables action and holds all actors to account. The accountability of commitments will be a significant pillar of this. One which I will be setting a bar on. Commitments are meaningless without a plan to deliver them. Further to that, a plan without action is a waste of paper. We need your engagement to drive the momentum from commitment to plan to action. This is a unique opportunity. So I look forward to working with all parties and stakeholders this year to land these paradigm shifts. Let us use our unique opportunity well. The world is counting on us. I thank you.
Simon, thank you so much, and again, for reminding us of the great opportunity that we do have. And again, I think really looking at that sense of transformation that has to happen right across all businesses. But I think one thing you also made very clear, which we will be talking about a lot in the next couple of days too, is the transformation of the global financial system. But we're going to hear a lot more about that throughout the next couple of days. And again, I think that willingness for the UNFCCC, as he said, the openness and that invitation there to say they're very willing to work differently and again to listen to everybody. But let's hear now about the outcomes of COP27. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, the COP27 President, is with us, and we're absolutely delighted to have him here from the Arab Republic of Egypt, His Excellency Sameh Shoukry. I'm delighted that you'll be able to join us, sir, and we're so looking forward to hearing your address. Thank you so much. Lovely.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend my congratulations and appreciation to the government of the United Arab Emirates and Masdar for hosting this edition of the Abuظbي Sustainability Week and for the excellent organization of the event. I want to seize this opportunity to extend my heartfelt congratulations to my brother, His Excellency Minister Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, COP28 President-Designate, as well as to Dr. Razan Al-Mubarak, UAE COP28's high-level climate champion. Abuظbi's Sustainability Week is an important platform for showcasing the vibrant transformation and the dynamism of socioeconomic and environmental sustainability in our region and beyond. This year's week acquires particular significance as it's held under the title of United on Climate Action towards COP28, thereby kicking off the journey of the climate conference from COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh progressively to its new home at COP28 in Dubai towards the end of this year. ADSW is also a vital demonstration of the immense potential that our region has and a reflection of the firm commitment to a just transition through international cooperation, deep and impactful transformation, sound sustainability policies and practices, and above all, to consistent and effective leadership in the global fight against climate crises. Both Egypt and the UAE have success stories and promising plans that prove that our region is on the right trajectory. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, since this is my first public event as COP27 President since the Sharm el-Sheikh conference concluded its proceedings on the morning of the 20th of November 2022, I am keen to share with you the most impactful outcomes and deliverables of the 27th United Nations Conference on Climate Change. Sharm el-Sheikh's COP27 was the largest international multilateral conference of our time, with more than 46,000 participants. It was also the conference of state parties coinciding with the 30th anniversary of the adoption of the UN framework on climate change. However, what made COP27 most meaningful and impactful was not only the virtue of its size or the host of transformative outcomes secured after difficult and lengthy negotiations, but rather the fact that it was a watershed moment when multilateralism achieved a decisive victory and emerged triumphant against all odds. On the 7th and 8th of November, close to 120 heads of state and government gathered in Sharm el-Sheikh to promote stronger climate action. and advocate against backsliding or backtracking. They discussed new pathways for cooperation regarding the future of energy, just transition, innovative finance, food and water security, and enhanced support to communities in climate-vulnerable situations. At a time when our world is grappling with a lengthy thread of cascading risks and overlapping challenges, including grave geopolitical tensions and polarization, unsettling energy and food crises, and uneven post-pandemic recovery, world leaders, ministers, negotiators chose the right thing to do and stood united to usher in a new era geared towards implementing climate commitments and pledges. Unanimously, the international community adopted the Sharm el-Sheikh Implementation Plan, a self-evident signal towards rapid, robust, and meaningful climate ambition and action. The outcomes of COP27, including the Sharm el-Sheikh Implementation Plan, were also a call for greater climate justice, where those contributing the least to climate change, yet bear most of the brunt of its adverse impacts, are accorded the fair treatment they deserve through a genuine just transition, as well as sufficient and accessible means of implementation. This was our commitment to our constituencies and partners in Africa, the Middle East, and the developing world at large, and we made every effort to fulfill it. At COP27, the relevance and credibility of the global climate diplomacy was contingent on listening and heeding to the calls for help by frontline communities in climate-vulnerable situations, the victims of climate-induced calamities and other adverse effects, and those whose lives and livelihoods were jeopardized by our sluggish efforts to offset the climate crisis. COP27 was the first COP ever to put funding, the response to loss and damage, on the formal agenda of the COP and CMA, and only 2 weeks after state parties adopted a historic agreement to establish new funding arrangements to respond to loss and damage, including through a fund addressing this purpose. In Sharm el-Sheikh, the international community convened to address the aspirations of millions of victims in Pakistan, Africa, small islands, and many other places around the world, that there is solid resolve to act and provide the necessary support. Ladies and gentlemen, Sharm el-Sheikh delivered outcomes that once again reiterated the need for urgent and robust mitigation measures that can preserve the Paris Agreement temperature goal, keeping the 1.5 degree within reach. The worrying findings provided by the best available science in the form of the IPCC reports, in addition to UNEP's emissions gap and the UNFCCC's NDC's synthesis reports, leaves us with a single option: to do more and to do it now. At COP27, the parties reached a breakthrough agreement on a 6-year new mitigation work program and opened a transformative pathway towards the first ever work program for just transition. This, together with a call for stronger commitment to new and enhanced nationally determined contributions and for progressive improvement in energy mixes, can put the world on the right track towards a global net zero by 2030. As part of the mitigation actions, COP27 outcomes confirmed the urgency of rapidly transforming energy systems and accelerating transition to renewable energy, and called for increasing the share of clean energy in the energy mix, thus achieving immediate, deep, and sustained emissions reductions. Furthermore, governments and other stakeholders sponsored several innovative and useful supporting initiatives towards further consolidating the status of renewable sources of energy. One notable initiative is the new Global Hydrogen Council, launched by Their Excellencies the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt and the Prime Minister of Belgium, as well as the Global Offshore Wind Alliance, led by Denmark and IRENA. Meanwhile, the Sharm el-Sheikh Implementation Plan advocated for further action, investment and finance for preservation and restoration of carbon sinks and stores, as well as other natural and ecological system solutions, notably for oceans and forests. On adaptation, COP27 committed itself to promoting a vigorous transformative adaptation agenda that secures sustainable resilience against climate shocks, laying the groundwork for the adaptation of a framework for the global goal on adaptation at COP28 in order to guide efforts to reduce risks of the negative impacts of climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, climate finance remains the area where the situation is the most disconcerting. The $100 billion per annum commitment is still unmet. We do note that developed countries have promised to deliver on it during this year, after 3 years of delay. But let me be clear, not delivering on such an important commitment has a direct impact, not only on the scale and level of action on the ground, or the trust between partners in this process, but also on the level of ambition and transformation expected from developing countries. Acknowledging the important role of the various finance stakeholders and the challenges facing developing countries due to the debt burden, financial constraints, and the increasing cost of finance, coupled with the limitations on access, COP27 delivered. It delivered a strong call for multilateral development banks and international financial institutions and their shareholders to reform the current policies, practices, and priorities, to scale up funding, ensure simplified access, and mobilize appropriate climate finance through the right instruments with concessional finance as the core for climate impact projects. This call was also echoed in the discussions on the new collective quantitative goal on finance, which will hopefully resonate with this year's deliberations, paving the way for its adoption before 2025. We made every effort to design and assemble a conference that ensures the highest level possible of dynamic and meaningful multi-stakeholder engagements with close to 12,000 participants from civil society and other constituencies. Through 11 thematic days and 14 flagship initiatives, COP27 presidency aimed to catalyze action on a wide range of issues, including finance, water, energy, decarbonization, biodiversity, and natural-based solutions, food systems and agriculture, water, gender, youth, civil society, and solutions. COP27 was clear on the need to ensure our collective action to safeguard and make use of natural carbon sinks, mainly forests and oceans. It was also very clear on the need to ensure coherence and cooperation on impacted sectors like water and other ecosystems, especially the shared ones. COP27 has confirmed yet again the vision crafted in the Convention and later in the Paris Agreement, that science and principles provide the guidance for our actions, and that cooperation is the cornerstone for effective and impactful climate action. Coordination and coherence, both in policies and actions at the international and regional levels, provide the required safeguards to avoid negative impacts, especially that shared ecosystems and resources which are vulnerable to climate impacts need a cooperative approach that ensures a win-win situation for peoples and nature. Ladies and gentlemen, COP27 has delivered against all odds, be it the challenging political international scene, debt and finance constraints, potential backsliding by some, undelivered pledges and commitments, especially on finance. It has delivered beyond the expectations of many. It is also worth mentioning that we heard the concerns expressed by some related to the need for more ambition, especially in mitigation. While we fully subscribe to such call and expectations, we were also faced by legitimate concerns that the COPs are just issuing pledges that are not fulfilled, that the climate process is delinked from reality, that some of those who are preaching for more ambition are expanding on fossil fuel, including new coal mines, delaying implementation of mitigation-related pledges, and transferring the responsibility to provide and mobilize finance to others. In the same vein, we heard that it is imperative that we, governments, private sector, civil society, and other stakeholders ought to focus on implementation, finding solutions to finance, technology, and transition challenges. Be just, work on the basis of equity, ensure that social and economic dimensions are part of our agreed and envisaged transition, and ensure that we are all delivering on our responsibilities as agreed on in the Convention and the Paris Agreement. As we start the countdown to COP28 in Dubai, the whole world, and particularly our region, aspires to resume and maximize the momentum created at COP27. The global challenge remains unabated, yet the necessity of doubling down on climate action, as well as the creation of resilient and low-carbon economies, is more important than ever. I am confident that COP28 will present its credentials as an important COP, where several crucial mandates and deliverables will be agreed and taken forward. High expectations are associated with a global goal on adaptation, climate finance, just transition, mitigation pathways, and deservingly on the first global stocktake exercise since the adoption of the Paris Agreement. The journey from Sharm el-Sheikh to Dubai is very instrumental to the rich and ambitious outcomes which we all look forward to at COP28. This is a journey where myself as COP President and the Egyptian government as a whole stand ready to provide unwavering support and partnership to our sisters and brothers from the UAE. I thank you.
And thank you so much, Your Excellency Sameh Shoukry. You're going to join the panel, I believe, in just a couple of moments, so do stay with us. We're going to enjoy hearing from you. And as you said, COP28 will build on the tremendous momentum that we all saw in Sharm el-Sheikh. And I know they're looking forward to that, really carrying on the great work, and again, making sure that they continue the efforts and the big focus on a just and equitable transition. This, of all things, is so very important here. And of course, we're very delighted that this is your first public engagement since your role, so we're delighted to have you here at Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week Summit, and we're looking forward to your contribution to the panel that's coming up now in just a moment. So again, this is our morning, part of our morning session as we go through many of the presidential address, the Prime Minister address, hearing from the United Nations FCCC, and also, you know, I think hearing very clearly there from His Excellency Al Suwaidi, laying out this morning what is going on and the hope and the plans and the intentions, just some of them. We're going to be hearing a lot more later throughout the day, in fact throughout the next couple of days, and indeed we will be hearing so many more developments in the months, the weeks and months to come. So much going on here. I think we're actually ready. So I am now going to hand over to our first panel of the day, and we're now going to be heading off from the road from 27 and heading to the road to COP28. Becky Anderson from CNN joins us. Please give her a warm welcome, Managing Editor and Anchor, CNN Abu Dhabi. And my dear friend, she's going to do the next panel. Becky, so lovely to see you.
Thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you so much. Great to see you all.
Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we know that we are not on track to meet the goals set out in the Paris Agreement. You heard that emphasised by Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber here this morning in his opening speech. Frankly, in many instances, the world is regressing, and that is not likely to change by COP28. But that does not mean that we cannot course correct. You heard Simon make that point just a few moments ago. The task ahead is massive, particularly against the current geopolitical and geoeconomic backdrop, but so is the opportunity. And it was Dr. Sultan this morning who said, and I quote him here, the road to net zero represents the biggest market transformation with the greatest economic promise since the Industrial Revolution, a low-carbon pathway to a high-growth destination with inclusive progress for all. The world must clearly demonstrate the pivot to a new era. You heard Simon talk about that. It's not the first time I've heard you, Simon, talk about the need for a focus on implementation. And I think anybody who's been involved in this process, including His Excellency Sameh Shoukry, will agree that it is now about implementation. The world is playing catch-up. We need to speed up our panel today on the road to COP28, then we'll discuss three very specific questions. What's standing in the way of progress? What needs to happen today to ensure real practical progress? And how can the UAE pave the way for that transformational change? I am delighted to be joined for that discussion by Excellencies Razan Al Mubarak, Sama Shukri, Laurent Fabius, and the UN's Simon Still. Welcome. Perhaps, Laurent Fabius, I'll start with you. You were the president of COP21, the architect of the 2015 Global Treaty on Climate Change, the Paris Agreement as we have come to know it. Can you briefly reflect on that experience and explain to us what you believe is standing, or who is standing in the way of progress today? What needs to be done?
Well, first, good morning, everybody, and I'm very pleased to be with you. Every COP is different. Well, the Paris COP was important because it has set the whole framework and the aims. I think the aims have not changed. It's always 1.5. It's always carbon neutral society. It's a new thing. It's probably, compared to Paris, the fact that we are now aware that biodiversity and fighting against climate warming, it's the same combat. But apart from that, the aim is the same. It is not a question of reconsidering Paris, it's to implement Paris. And from that viewpoint, I fully share the definition which has been given by President of COP28 this morning, COP of actions, COP for all. It's exactly what is necessary. Which means what? COP of actions, it means that the priority must be given to what we must do in the coming years. The economist, famous economist, Mr. Keynes, was saying that in the long term we are all dead. Yeah. But if we don't act in the short term, we'll be twofold dead. Therefore, and especially I'm thinking about you, Simon, about global stocktake. Okay, it's excellent. It was decided in Paris. But the global stocktake will say things, what is the situation? But for me, it's a global stocktake for action, to act. How to close the gap, and not to close the gap in 20 years, but in the 7 years coming. Therefore, COP for action, it means acting short term. It means finance. I think this COP has to deal with finance, and especially I hope that we can deliver a lot of things this year, and especially what you initiated, Sami, bravo for that, the loss and damage fund. I think if it can be delivered really with the precision in the Emirates, it will be excellent. COP for all. It means, presidency. A good presidency needs trust. Trust is a key word. And if you want to have trust, okay, you have to have competence, but all this is evident. But you have to speak for all. Not only for the big ones, but also for the small ones. For the poorest, for the social transition, and for these elements which are decisive, mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, finance. Therefore, I completely agree with, from my own experience in Paris, COP for action, COP for all, and it's a good summary of how this COP, and I'm fully confident, can be helpful.
COP for action, COP for all. Let's take the COP for all, because you're right to point out that loss and damage was a real success out of COP27, although the structure of the fund and who will contribute very much still a work in progress. Less successful, many will say, with respect, was the lack of really transformative climate action, not enough done in reining in damaging emissions. And I've just listened to your speech, and you're absolutely right to point out there was lots of work done on sort of introducing innovative solutions, transformative technology. I know there was a lot of work done behind the scenes with biolats as people began to really put some meat on the bone of initiatives. But let's be quite frank, you know, we talk about, when we talk about the successful failure of these COPs, we talk about the big headlines. The big headline for you was a successful loss and damage inclusion in the agenda. The less successful result, reining in damaging emissions. What did you learn, Your Excellency, out of Sharm el-Sheikh? You retained the presidency through November. What did you learn that will help pave the way for this next meeting?
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you, and this is maybe a very impactful conversation that we're having, and I'm glad to be with such illustrious personalities who have much more experience than I. Let me also refer to the fact that we coined COP27 as the COP of implementation. And I believe that implementation must carry through to 28 and 29, that this is an incremental process. We're not going to resolve all of the issues related to climate change and meet that challenge within one COP, and hopefully we can expedite and elevate our ambitions, but we have to also be practical and recognize the limitations. And those limitations are not only related to the subject at hand. The subject at hand, I think there's a collective recognition of the existential nature of this challenge and our need to continually do more to address it and show more effectiveness and more resilience and more abilities. And these abilities are developing and are being impacted by science, by innovation, by the ability to introduce and absorb new technologies that have a specific impact. Yes, we are proud to have been able to deliver on a long-awaited 40 years in the making on loss and damage, and we look forward to the finalization of the structure and the governance and the architecture of the fund, and hopefully that it will be endorsed, but more importantly that it will be financed in COP28. Without that finance, and here again it is a matter, again, it is a collective responsibility of the parties who can also be proud of their contribution to this important development, but it is an issue of trust. It is to what extent within the parties we can motivate that trust, and how do we evaluate the degree of success or the limitations. And here when we speak about the what some might consider a limitation in the ambition on mitigation, we have to take the issue in a holistic manner. We seem to neglect the polarization, the geostrategic conditions, the economic impacts, the food security, the energy costs. All of these have had a pertinent impact on the level of ambition and what we can deliver within the context of the general atmosphere. It's also incumbent to refer to the fact that there are deficiencies, there are gaps. When we speak about our objectives, it is mitigation, it is adaptation, it is finance. And here, how have we delivered and how have we made it possible to align our ambition with the finance that is provided, whether it is the finance related to the parties, the 100 billion that are still not being fulfilled, whether we have been able at least to promote the issue of the MDBs and their reform, but we have not seen sufficient traction in that regard. Hopefully, by the spring meeting, we might see some more positive indications. So again, ambition and mitigation has to be coupled with delivery in terms of finance. Developing countries who have contributed the least cannot shoulder the burden without providing them the tools to do so in terms of finance, obligations, whether at the governmental or private sector or financial institutions.
Have we blown through 1.5 at this point? And if so, should we admit to that on the road to COP28? You know the global stocktake, and I'm going to come to you, Razan, for your thoughts on really drilling down on how the UAE can pave the way for future ambition. But Simon, the global stocktake is a first ever. It'll be delivered at COP28. It starts now. We all know, sitting here, that it's going to look pretty awful. In saying that, it will help inform what happens over the next 7 years if we are going to get anywhere close to the ambition set out in Paris. So 2 questions. Should we maintain that ambition? And secondly, just walk us through why it is that stocktake, that global stocktake, is so pivotal at this point.
Well, thank you, Becky. In terms of the target is still clearly there. The science tells us that. The science also tells us that it is still possible. The window is closing and closing fast. And we've seen synthesis report after synthesis report of NDCs that tell us we are off track. The importance of this moment with COP28 and the global stocktake, which gives us a holistic opportunity to look back, but also, and this is the critical piece, is about moving forward and how we move forward. So we know without the publication of that stocktake, we know things don't look very pretty. But the most important thing is if the global stocktake does what it is supposed to do, and it informs us as to the roadmap as to how we move forward, precisely where those gaps are, region by region, sector by sector, actor by actor, that it is presented in a practical and usable way that provides us with a blueprint as how to course correct. This is the opportunity to reset the process and to course correct. And the science tells us it is still possible. The technology, the innovations that are available tell us it is possible. And in terms of what nation states need to do, it is clear.
So that the work that's being done now will help inform the full agenda for COP28 in November. You say we should stick to that 1.5. I think the idea being that if we don't, nobody has a target, and then it all goes. It will all go pear-shaped. The United Nations chief, Razan, has made it clear that the continued use of and investment in fossil fuels puts the world on a climate highway to hell. As the country gets set to host COP28, there are critics who say that the UAE upping its investment in oil and gas is fundamentally in conflict with climate goals. So as you get set with your new role as UN Climate Change High-Level Champion, and I'd like you to explain what that role is, if you will, because I think it will be important for the audience here. How do you square what to many feels like a circle here with this conflict of interest?
Well, thank you, and thank you for calling on the elephant in the room. For me, coming from the United Arab Emirates, there's a slogan that now has been very much part and parcel of our development path. And the slogan is a saying from His Highness the President, is when we load up the last barrel of oil, we shall celebrate. And it's in this context that we recognize that fossil fuels as a technology is a technology that is ripe for disruption and ripe for replacement, for evolution. Climate change brings that narrative to light, but it brings it with a sense of great urgency and speed. So essentially, it's always been there, but now climate change added a needed and required sense of urgency and time. And you know, as we talk about the global stocktake and what it would tell us, the notion of potentially pessimism from a high-level champion's perspective, which is something that, you know, is a role that I'm extremely honored and privileged to take, and to work with the other high-level champions from the Egyptian presidency, Dr. Mahmoud. Essentially, it was conceived in Paris. It was a success from the Lima to Paris agreement. It came from a deep recognition of really the role of non-state actors. And non-state actors is UN speech or speak for anyone that does not represent the national government. So it's essentially civil society, private sector, investors, academia, and so forth. And because it's recognized that climate change essentially is a whole-of-world problem that must be approached by a whole-of-society response. And therein lies the opportunity, because when you look at the various breakthroughs presented by non-state actors that can potentially move with a greater agility and speed and potentially innovation, then you see the opportunities, and you see that the goal of 1.5 degrees, which the COP28 presidency is committed to achieve, is ambitious, it's hard, but it's achievable.
You have deep experience in the world of nature and conservation. Energy has an outsized impact on the delivery of climate action, but nature and conservation has a very significant role to play. I just want to come back to you quickly here before we talk about what we expect to see in the massive ratcheting up of investment in decarbonisation of energy and climate finance, which is clearly where we are at this point in order to find some success in COP28. Just explain to us, ahead of COP28, in your new role, you clearly bring this deep experience to bear. How do you see your background in nature-based solutions contributing to the work that you do? Because we so often talk about energy as the kind of, you know, the key driver, and it is when it comes to climate solutions. But I think it's just worth you spending a moment or two talking about the other side of the coin, as it were.
No, I mean, absolutely, and that has been my greatest challenge from a career perspective, to bring nature as a significant player within the climate change discourse. And this is my great opportunity to do that as a high-level champion. And again, you know, Dr. Mahmoud and I decided very early on that we would be leveraging on each other's expertise. And with his support, I will be pushing the nature button, because I genuinely believe that whilst nature is, of course, affected by climate change, like many systems around the world and on the planet, but it is also our greatest ally. Let's put this also straight. We will not achieve the 1.5 degree Celsius target if we do not protect nature. Nature can provide up to 30% of carbon dioxide mitigations by 2030. And I'd like to expand the narrative. Nature is not only an asset for adaptation, but also it's an asset for mitigation. It's a technology that works, so it's the least expensive. It is a technology that we already know works, and it's at scale, and it's where the communities are. So for me, I will certainly leverage my network within the conservation to bring the climate change and biodiversity agenda together where they belong.
Great. And that's important. Thank you. So that is a key priority. Do not have any doubt for Razan Al Mubarak as we chart a path towards COP28 and beyond. Another clear priority for COP28 will be the massive ratcheting up of investment in decarbonisation of the energy sector and in climate finance. Look, the argument I've heard here that unplugging the current system before building a robust enough alternative puts the world at risk is a reasonable argument. So, how confident are we here that we will identify the right investment in decarbonisation of the energy sector, nail the right action on climate finance between now and 28 in principle and beyond? And Laura Fabius, I just do want to ask you how important you believe COPs really are, how useful they are. So I've got two questions there. You can take last one first, or I can have my esteemed panelists beside you talking about where you genuinely believe we can see action now and going forward.
Well, there is a relationship between the two questions, but I will take the largest one. Are COPs useful? If I answer no, I think it will be written in the newspapers. But
I will be out of a job.
But my answer is yes. And if you give me 2 minutes, I will try to illustrate that. First, when you are looking at recent history, each COP has brought a contribution. Sometimes not enough. But let's remember, COP21, it's sure. COP24, we have forgotten that, but it's a COP which has insisted on just transition, which is very important, because our problems are also social problems. COP27, the creation of loss and damage. COP15 on biodiversity. It's different, but it was useful too. Therefore, each COP brings something. Second, international cooperation is crucial to move forward because of the very nature of the phenomenon. And COPs, whether we like it or not, are the only global meetings that bring all governments to the table to take decisions on environmental and climate issues. And when President Lula in Brazil decided to have a new position about environment and deforestation, what was his first proposal? That the COP30 will take place in Brazil first. I know that there are criticisms, and they're useful. Progress has been made, but it is still insufficient. But look, and it is important for you, Simon, when you will discuss about stocktake. Before Paris, the trend was about 4 degrees. I've forgotten that. Now, I don't know what will be the final result, but we are about 2.7. Yeah. Okay. The aim is 1.5, but there is a difference between 4 and 1.5. And decisions taken at COPs are often not enough ambition. Sometimes they are seen as being not legally binding. No. You know, I am now the head of the Supreme Court in France, and I know that national judges are now considering more and more Paris decisions as legally binding. You know, it's changing. And it is true that sometimes there is a lack of transparency, of democracy, of openness. Therefore, we need necessary evolution, and I think they will take place here. For instance, we have to have a better harmony between instances and calendars. It's particularly true for finance. You don't change finance like that. We have to have cooperation with IMF, with World Bank. We have to, you know, and COP about biodiversity as well. We have to have a better verification of results. It is required. And the question of transparency is decisive. Because let's be honest, greenwashing does exist. There is a difference between green talking, greenwashing, and green acting. And we need transparency, and we need to have a largest participation, I mean public and private use, different communities. Therefore, I think COPs are not perfect, but they are useful, and I fully have hope that this COP, the new COP, 28 COP, will show that it is useful.
It's an intergovernmental process which has a dual track, doesn't it, outside of that, with the rest of the world, as it were. You know, the public sector, maybe inside one room, the private sector. We are encouraging increasingly and quickly to be on that other track, ensuring that, you know, that both sides of this are working together. Samuel Shukri, you've just experienced the thrill of and the frustration of what goes into, you know, that process that I am talking about. So as we spend the next 2 or 3 minutes each just sort of concluding what we hope to achieve now and through COP28. What are your conclusions? Tell me. We've talked about what we believe was achieved. We've talked about what we hope will be achieved post COP27 with the groundwork that was laid. We talked about some of what are perceived to have been the failures of the meeting, the summit that you were president, are president of. What can we realistically expect to see happen next, and how important is it, as Simon spoke to you today in his speech, that everybody has a seat at the table? There has been some controversy and criticism about the UAE hosting this meeting, it being a big oil and gas producer. How important at this stage is it that everybody, industry included, whether you like it or not, is at the table, has a top seat at the table, and brings their experience to bear?
I think it's the inclusivity of the process and to maintain the momentum. The inclusivity, as Laurent mentioned, this is an intergovernment negotiating process, and necessarily it has to be because of the regulatory function of governments. If the governments were not to buy in to the ambition and to the process, then there will be a chaos in what we can implement and how we can move forward. I think it still is a matter of implementation, that we maintain the implementation, that we collectively rely on all of the various segments, whether it is the intergovernment negotiating process, whether it is the various stockholders and the civil society, the public sector. The civil society is a very important aspect because it keeps the governments honest and it keeps them on track, and it raises the level of ambition, and we have to recognize that it is ordinary people who are affected. It is those who, not only in Pakistan and South Africa who have been affected, but we've seen the effects in Europe this last summer, in the United States, and the consequences of not raising the ambition but not providing the tools. The stock taking is important, and we had a discussion this morning with Simon that the stock take should not necessarily be deemed as a critique of the process, but more as a, well, yes, we recognize our deficiencies to learn from lessons of the past, but we should look forward in what we need to do to bridge the gaps and to be able to achieve our common objectives in a realistic and a practical manner. The issue of confidence, trust, a just transition. And here again, there are varying degrees of development within the world, and we have to recognize that and see how we can accommodate and move forward and not put a burden. I think it's important to insulate the process from some of the geopolitical tensions, because these tensions will come and they will be resolved. But the climate crisis will not if we don't raise to the objective. We also have to insulate it from the sometimes the impression that it is being utilized for purposes other than meeting the climate crisis, for economic purposes, for competitiveness. And that isn't what we should be doing, and it detracts from the process. It puts burdens on it, and it deviates from the necessary cohesive action that we have to undertake.
Son.
I think the process that we have to work with is an imperfect one, but it's what we have. And as Laurence said, if we reflect on where we've come from and where we are now, progress has been made. But as I said, what we're doing is difficult, and we have work to do. What COP28 offers us is that opportunity to stock check, but to course correct. And I think that this is as critical a moment as Paris was. And it's incumbent on all of us. And what is unique about the stocktake, it's not only looking at the intergovernmental pieces, it is looking at the non-state actor space, the private sector, industry sectors. And that is where transformation will happen. As Seme said, governments are responsible for the legal regulatory framework. That is where pressure can be brought to bear within the COP process. But it's how that applies and how that is implemented, and we always come back to that word, implementation, how it's implemented in those industries, in those sectors. We have two challenges in the lead up to COP28. One is defining and making sure that we design this stocktake as impactfully as it needs to, and the Secretariat has an important role in doing it, but it has to be absorbed by parties and responded to by parties, state actors. The other element is, once this is presented in a practical form, is for us to shift our mindsets and actually do. This could be the last opportunity that we have to interfere with the process in order to get us on the path that we need to.
Razan, I leave the last word to you then, because I know that the UAE does not take this responsibility lightly. I know it understands the responsibility of building, and in many instances rebuilding, confidence and trust in the process and in the ambition. You are, we look forward to hearing from you more in your role as high-level champion. You will be embedded now in the sort of local process, the national process in building the agenda towards November 2023. At this point, what will success look like to you and those involved in COP28?
So really building on sort of my predecessors, be it the COP presidencies or the high-level champions, and something that was said just now by Laurent, it's a success would look for me and for the COP28 presidency is a true embodiment of a COP for all. Inclusivity not be taken as a token, not be taken by default, but from the get-go, from the design side. As high-level champion, for example, my intention is to, again, build upon the great work of my predecessors, and there are incredible campaigns that have been established bringing and accelerating climate action on many fronts and across sectors, Race to Zero and Race to Resilience. So again, though, for them to be effective or more effective and more enhanced is the representation, or a wider representation and participation from the global south would define success for me. Another notion of inclusivity again is working with our champion for youth, and again engaging with youth in an authentic and real way, not only in defining the problem but also in designing solutions. So inclusivity is extremely important, as well as accountability across the board. As we think about the results of the global stocktake, not only are the results extremely important, but how we reached the results would also be extremely important. So accountability across the board and across everything that we do will build upon for the next COPs moving forward.
You'll be working closely with Simon, who is the sort of chief of accountability going forward. I mean, it's an appeal that the UN chief made, that there is a real process of accountability in all of this. Antonio Guterres, and I'm going to close it here, and it's been fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for this. It's been really insightful. The UN chief never misses the opportunity to remind us that we are staring into an abyss of irreversible climate consequences should we not act, and act in a really prescient fashion now. But I will just close by saying I was pleasantly surprised by Antonio's recent speech, where he actually appealed for a sense of hope in 2023. So as we come out of the gate, and as we establish the work that is being done here and around the world, but all roads lead to Abu Dhabi and the UAE this year when it comes to climate action, I think we should remind ourselves that as much as anything, we need some hope at this point. So we are relying on the work that's been done through the UAE's presidency and the presidency that you retain until the COP28 meeting, Mr. Shukri, to ensure that we all feel that 2023 is a success. So with that, I thank you very much indeed. It's been fascinating to hear you chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know it's comfortable there. We have to move you on. Thank you so much, Becky. Great to see you. And again, our dear panel here really looking on the road to COP28 there. We were so honored to have Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak joining us, Laurent Fabius, His Excellency Sameh Shukri also, and Simon Steele from the UNFCCC. So tremendous to hear there from all of them and hear their expertise and indeed share it with us as we look ahead at the important road to COP28. And I loved the way they brought home the importance of COP. And again, I think it was a very realistic, pragmatic discussion, talking about the fact that perhaps sometimes not everybody looks at COP perhaps with the same eyes that we do, but indeed they brought it home, the amount of work that has been done by all of the parties involved, and again, bringing together the key players from around the world to actually talk about these issues that impact each and every one of us. I think it's time for an update on what's happening in Europe. So please, I know you all want to talk to our last panel, and they still have plenty to say, but I'm going to ask you if you could please sit down and join us for this update from Europe. There's a lot, of course, lots of follow-on that we're going to have from every panel, but I'm going to invite the Executive Vice President for the European Green Deal, European Commission. Frans Timmermans is with us. Frans, can you come and join me?
Hello there.
Lovely to see you. Thank you so much. And, you know, we have a quick session here, but we have lots that we can get involved in. And I think right away we have to just look at, you know, sort of a bit of an update from Europe. You know, despite the energy crisis, despite geopolitical concerns, how do you think that Europe is, I suppose, staying the course and even accelerating clean energy transition?
Well, the main driver today, of course, is this horrible war that was started by Putin, which means that we need to wean ourselves of Russian oil and gas as quickly as possible, which means that we need to accelerate our energy transition, which fits nicely with the European Green Deal, and it also means that we need to create energy sovereignty for Europe. And since we don't have any fossil fuels ourselves, we have a bit of gas, we have still little bit of coal left, but no oil. The only way we can increase our energy sovereignty is through renewables. So we need to build up the renewables even faster than we had anticipated before, and not just for climate reasons, but also for geopolitical reasons.
And when you look at, I suppose, the importance of working with international partners, I mean, this is a global problem. It needs a global solution. And while, I mean, I think Europe gets, you know, a lot of people look to Europe and say, perhaps we can do and perhaps we should do what you're doing there. But again, we need to all work on this together to really keep the 1.5 degrees within reach.
Yes.
And you know, we haven't really done it well enough, have we?
No, we haven't, but I think we in Europe, we show that through a mix of policies, starting now, we can reduce our emissions. We're on track to reduce our emissions with at least 55% by 2030. We're on track to be climate neutral by 2050, but you can only do that if you implement policies now. There's no time to waste. We need to do it now. And we've done a number of things. We are phasing out internal combustion engine cars. We have increased our emissions trading system and also expanded it to aviation and shipping and to housing and to transport. All these things are very difficult to do, but they can be done. And they also bring about a new economy in this industrial revolution, helping us to create new jobs, better paying jobs, cleaner jobs. So it all fits together, but it's a tremendous effort at a time when people are already feeling insecure because of all sorts of developments, and we need to convince people to embrace this future and to work on this future now.
And again, I suppose, you know, people look at all the challenges that are laid out in front of us and we see them, you know, day in, day out, and I think when we see, you know, geopolitical issues that actually are impacting our climate and our energy agenda, you know, people are running scared. They're not sure, and I think it's that uncertainty sometimes. But again, I think those challenges that are there, it is about turning them into opportunities, and also, as you say, new jobs for the clean energy transition. Do you see anywhere that has really started, you know, down that road and it's succeeding?
Well, I think what's worked very well in our industry is the emissions trading system, which puts a price on carbon. And industry is used to it. Industry knows how to work with it. The price has gone up, and it has incentivized industry to decarbonize. And I believe the lesson for the world could be there's no way you can decarbonize without putting a price on carbon. And I hope others will do it. I'm still amazed that the United States isn't doing this. A nation based on market economy principles. We're now applying market economy principles to the pricing of carbon, and it's working well. I hope this example would be followed by others.
I mean, there are some voices in America that can't believe they're doing it either. But sadly, that's the situation at the moment. But again, the policies, you know, around the world don't always run in harmony.
No.
And, you know, while I think many look at what's going on in Europe, there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. You know, how can we actually, you know, try and, you know, maybe exert a little bit more influence, maybe nudge a little bit more, because it must be so frustrating, you know, when Europe looks at this as well and sees just, you know, the sort of shambles the policy is around the world, really.
Well, I think, you know, what we're confronted with in the Western world over the last 20 years is this enormous increase of differences between people who have a lot and people who don't have anything. I think one of the biggest problems we're faced with as Western world is a lack of trust in governance and in politics, because so many people feel left behind. You know, if you look at the discrepancy between what CEOs are making and what ordinary workers are making, that has increased exponentially over the last 20 years, and it's undermined democracy. We have to be very careful with that.
Yes, yes, but I mean, if you're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, you've probably worked incredibly hard to do it. I mean, I take on board what you're saying.
Sure, but if you make 20 times as much as the average worker, as was the case in the 1970s, but if you now make 400 times as much as the average worker, I'm not sure that's still equitable, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in that sense, and there has to be, you know, we've got to work on putting some more, you know, equity and fairness into it.
The point I'm trying to make is that if you want people to follow you in a fundamental change of how we live, because we're moving away from fossil fuels, they have to trust you. And if they don't know how to make the end of the month, the end of the planet is not their main concern. And we need to make sure we take care of both issues. The climate change issue is also fundamentally a social issue. And if we disregard that, we will not be successful, because in democracies, people will not follow us into this new future if they don't believe they're part of it.
Absolutely, and you're not even talking about the issues in terms of energy poverty. This
Exactly.
is in the developed world where that lack of trust is happening as well, and the fact that there's a lot of poor people within the developed world that have to be looked at. Moving on to emerging markets and the developing world, because again, we really need to be looking at a fair and equitable and a just transition, and if we keep doing things the way we are, that's not going to happen either. What can we do to actually, maybe accelerate that and help other people?
Well, think in Africa, for instance, 600 million people don't have access to energy. Bring renewable energy to every corner of Africa, and 600 million people have a chance to develop. Women will have an opportunity to cook without poisoning themselves by burning charcoal. And their babies on their backs will not have to breathe in that charcoal fumes either. Young people will have access to study materials they can get from all over the world on their smartphones or at schools. I mean, just imagine if we could unleash the potential of a place like Africa, it would change the world, and it would increase trust of people in renewable energy. It would be a development and economic growth without burning fossil fuels, without creating CO2 emissions, and it would also alleviate some of the biggest problems we have on this planet, which is transforming the potential of the Industrial Revolution in actual economic growth.
And these are not difficult ambitions, really. I mean, this is simple stuff. So what's happening? Is it the lack of political will? What's preventing that?
I think it's mostly the lack of transformational capacity. I mean, we all act with the preconceived knowledge we've got from our parents and our grandparents, and we are in such a fundamentally transformational period in history that it's very often very difficult to grasp that transformation. But once you see it, you become enthusiastic about it. And once we start, the long-term success can only be achieved if we also have short-term successes. If we can give some examples how this can work and how this can work quickly. And Abu Dhabi is a great example, or the Emirates are a great example of fostering, of stimulating certain developments, especially in the global south, where they have created, sometimes even only on a local scale, transformation that inspires many others to want the same. And I think this is the way forward.
Talk to me about the money. I was at the Atlantic Council yesterday and listening to John Kerry, and he said basically it's all about the money. We need the cash, we need it quickly, and we need a lot of it.
Yes. So I hope he can convince Congress to do something on that. It's not been very forthcoming, but I don't want to joke about this. The thing is, we need to also unleash the huge potential of private investment, which is out there, which is still a bit on the fence. And so we need to make sure that we change the whole international financial system. The multilateral development banks are not in a position to do what they need to do today. We are not using the potential of the IMF we could be using. I don't understand why we could not use the special drawing rights of rich countries to empower African nations and other nations to invest, to get rid of some of their debt. That would create an economic dynamic that would incentivize the private sector to invest trillions, and we need to invest trillions. And the beauty about renewable energy is that return on investment is very fast, much faster than with fossil fuels. So once you start investing, in 4 or 5 years' time, the return on investment will be coming back. And then you create this avalanche of investments that we need.
And we've only got a few minutes left, but very, very quickly, the road to COP28. We're well on it now. Here we are at the beginning of the year. What's your hopes and ambitions for the year ahead?
Well, I'm really excited about the ambitions expressed also this morning by Dr. Sultan. I have such confidence in his ability to steer us into the right direction. There was some criticism, this guy is a CEO of an oil company.
But they don't look beyond that.
But look at his track record.
Yes.
Impressive track record. He started with sustainability policies long before anybody else in the oil and gas sector was able to do that or was convinced. Now, we have some really tough cookies in that sector that we need to address, but I want them on board. I don't want them vilified. I want them on board, and I want him, and I'll help him where we can, to convince other executives in the oil and gas to finally start investing in transition towards renewable energy, because they have a lot of assets that are going to be essential also in a post-carbon world. The logistics, the scientific research, etc., etc. And I think COP28 could be very useful to bring us together. And the other advantage of the Emirates is part of the global south and the global north. So there's no need for us to have another confrontation such as we had in the past between the global south and the global north. We're now in a position, especially after the decision we took on loss and damage in Sharm el-Sheikh, we're now in a position to really start building bridges, and I'm really looking forward to that, together with the Emirates.
Super, okay, and I know we'll be seeing you throughout the year, I hope, and looking forward to hearing a lot more from you later in the year at COP28. We have to leave it there. Frans Timmermans, Executive Vice President, European Green Deal for the European Commission.
Thank you very much.
Keep up the good work. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
We have to leave it there. Thank you. And again, really great to hear that so many conferences that I do address, I think we hear time and time again, we should be doing what Europe is doing. We should be looking at a better Green Deal. We should be looking at the carbon trading system, all of that. So, I mean, they still have their challenges in Europe. We didn't quite pin him down too much on that, but I don't think we're going to solve his challenges right now here. But again, it's great to hear from him and to really hear what's happening there. And again, I think the enthusiasm and the interest and the support that he will be able to give here to the UAE. Europe has a lot going on. I think they've really led the way in so many areas, and indeed it's something that we can probably all learn from. There's no point in this industry in reinventing the wheel. It doesn't really help anybody. My wheel here has nearly been reinvented. Well done, guys. We have another big panel coming up. And again, we're looking at energy. We're looking at the transition. We're looking at the road to COP. But within that, we're also looking at water. We're looking at food. We're looking at an entire nexus that we really have to look after. And our next panel deals specifically with that, a manifesto for food systems. So we have a great lineup here. And I do believe I've almost got a green light. We're almost there. But we're going to be talking to a wide variety of people. The Minister for Climate Change and Environment will be here. We have a gentleman from Egypt. We've got Africa, Aerofarms, USA, and Norway. So we've gone around the world to bring the very best examples to you. And let me, I think, now welcome the Managing Director and Partner from BCG. Chris Mitchell is with us, and Chris is going to bring his panel, and we are ready for them. Thank you so much, Chris.
Yes. Thank you very much. So I'm Chris Mitchell, a Managing Director and Partner at BCG, and I co-lead our food systems practice. So a manifesto. What do we mean by manifesto? A public declaration of policy and aims that can handle the required complexity in food systems, of being able to work all the way from forks to farm, balancing both mitigation and adaptation, recognizing the differences in the production practices and the consumption habits between the global north and the global south, one in which the public, the private, and the social sector sees itself and its priorities reflected, and one that still, at the end of the day, delivers food that the vast majority of us in this room feel is affordable, sustainable, healthy, and, very importantly, desirable. So I want to start this panel by asking our panelists, who I'll introduce just now, what do you think is needed to create a manifesto for food systems transformation? And what role must COP28, building from the Food Systems Summit of 2021, and of course COP27, what will COP28 do to bring about this manifesto? So we're joined by Her Excellency Mariam Al-Mahari, Minister of Climate Change and Environment of the UAE, Ahmed Al-Hoshi, CEO of OCI and Fertiglobe, Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the President of AGRA, David Rosenberg, the CEO and co-founder of Aerofarms, and Dr. Gunhild Stordalen, the founder and executive chair of EAT. So first, Your Excellency, a lot of responsibility. We've heard a lot about this today. UAE picking up where Egypt left off. What is needed in COP28 to get to a manifesto that unifies the world and this great diversity of stakeholders I just outlined towards a common manifesto for food systems transformation?
Thank you, Chris. for having us, and thank you so much. And it's so wonderful to be here with my friends, the food systems friends. First of all, we need to make sure that food systems has center stage at COP28, and building on the successes of COP27, where there were dedicated pavilions on food and ag. Then the initiative FAST was also initiated. Before that, in COP26, we had the agriculture breakthrough. Aim for C was also initiated. So we need to build on that momentum as we go to COP28. Now, the UAE has two hats this year. So we're hosting the COP28, that's one hat, and that's going to be spearheaded by my colleagues Sultan, Razan, and Shemma. And for the first time, we have a youth climate champion, which we're very proud of. Then, of course, the UAE has a second hat, which is positioning itself as a party member at COP28. And here we want to showcase not only the conversations we're having on a just energy transition, but also food systems transition. When it comes to biodiversity, I'm sure you just saw Razan speak about the power of nature and making nature our ally. Reversing biodiversity loss, tackling pollution, tackling waste, enhancing environment security. So there's so many other aspects that we're going to talk about. And food systems must have a center stage. When we look at facts such as the global greenhouse gas emissions, food systems contribute to a third of those emissions. So they are a problem, but they are also a solution. And that's why so many of my colleagues here, and each in their own domain, really has so much to talk about on how food systems transformation is such a powerful tool in combating climate change. So as we go to COP28, my feeling is we have to unlock the power of innovation, and really looking at my own country and what innovation has done for us, it's really unbelievable. The last 3-4 years, the kinds of foods we're able to actually grow in the desert, in closed systems, recirculating the water, taking that knowledge, bringing low tech to a lot of the developing countries as well, helping them also transform their food systems is really important here. So unlocking innovation, this needs finance, and that's why the COP28 team, their role in the finance and is going to be critical for this. But for me, the power of innovation is such a powerful thing here. And then, of course, working together with all the partners.
Yes. And we're going to come back to the topic of finance. But I'd love to hear, Ahmed, what do you think? You're upstream, representing more of the input side. What do you think is needed for a manifesto?
Yeah, so just by way of background, our company produces nitrogen fertilizer, which is basically providing an increase in crop yields that account for about 4 out of the world's 8 billion people's worth of food supply. But we're quite far upstream, as you mentioned. And to work on the food manifesto, and we were talking about it backstage a little bit as well, I think that what comes across is there's real focus on having to price externalities, as some of us learned in economics, positive and negative. One big one is pricing CO2. There's no price for CO2 globally right now, and it's having that transparency. Those are, having everybody around the table in COP28, like we had them in Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh in COP27, is vital, because once you price those externalities, especially the negative ones, over time you'll price biodiversity, water, all of the above. Then you focus on the value chains, because like I said, we're very far upstream. We're not that close to, for example, the cereal that you eat in the morning. There's it's B to B to B to B to B to C with the customer. So that understanding of that value chain, how to shorten it, having all the key members in that value chain involved, which involves regulatory involvement as well, is vital, so that we can see what's the lowest hanging fruit, so we can make change and we can scale that change. Because what's very important is it needs to be practical, it needs to be scalable. And we're a bit concerned. I mean, we would like to avoid getting too theoretical when you need to effect change as quickly as possible, as Dr. Sultan said this morning. And to do so, we're going to continue to work on innovation and the theoretical side, but we need to scale and create markets so that we can decarbonize quickly, not just our own production, but downstream. You know, the food chain itself creates a lot of carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity losses, et cetera, along the way.
So a common understanding of price and almost a scoreboard against which to measure transformation. Dr. Kalibata, what are your thoughts on a manifesto, and particularly how that manifesto can represent Africa and the Global South as much as the Global North?
No, thank you for having us and for the leadership that we're seeing from the UAE. Thank you, Minister, for your leadership. I really love the fact that we are talking about a manifesto for food systems. We came last year when we were concluding on the Food Systems Summit. I was extremely proud of what we were able to do, the Food Systems Summit, because we set a very strong agenda with regards to agreeing on what needs to be done, agreeing on what is broken, recognizing that we have a problem in our midst and that food system is part of the problem, recognizing that we are responsible for what's happening in the food system, and recognizing that we have solutions. I mean, Gunhill was part of highlighting some of the solutions that sit in our food system. But where we didn't go close enough, and where I feel like COP28 could be hugely successful, is really agreeing on the action that is required as we go forward, having one agenda of transforming the food system, as was said in the earlier meeting today. We must move to the future. And moving to the future means that we must agree. I feel like we have all the solutions. We are touching on a number of things, but we must agree that there's only one agenda, a net zero food system. And COP28 can get us closer to that than we've currently done so far.
Great, thank you. David, let me turn to you. Obviously, a big focus on technology and innovation, which has already been mentioned, and that's what AeroFarms is all about. But what role do you think those aspects have in a manifesto?
Well, for the manifesto, I'll give two opportunities that I'll highlight. One is labeling. Something happened during, I think it was COVID, where we found that customers started to ask for the how, not just the what. So not only what they want, but how is it grown? And that interest in how, I think that's a growing trend, and it comes to labeling. So in so much as we could have transparency in how we grow food and the type of nutrients or energy or pollution that goes into growing food, we want an educated customer, and we want those customers to ask the right questions that really drives the right behavior. So good transparency in labels. And then the other side of that is we have a lot of governments going to COP28 that have tremendous purchasing power. So how can that purchasing power drive change through the supply chain? By rewarding good actors. So put a premium on good actors that are farmers that are growing the right way, or suppliers that are growing the right way, to try to challenge and really drive the right performance in the supply chain, and reward innovation, or that often gets to doing more with less. And beyond the governments, also looking at the edges of the supply chain, the big retailers. And this is building off a fun conversation we had in the green room, but getting the Walmarts of the world to really ask and demand their suppliers to have transparency in labels, and driving that purchasing power, communicating to their customers along with governments.
This idea of a common understanding, whether that's a price of carbon, whether that's front of pack labeling that covers not only nutrition but also environmental externalities, is very clear. Dr. Stordalen, I want to turn to you. The Eat Lancet really was a huge step forward in terms of understanding how you can connect diets to planetary boundaries, and how we can't talk about food systems in a planetary way, and that it breaks down to the diets and the production systems of every continent. How do we make sure that this manifesto reflects that kind of diversity, but also that immovable fact that we have to be able to feed a growing population within the planetary boundaries?
Thanks so much, Chris. Very excited to be here. if you excuse me, I will start in the other end, because first of all, I think a manifesto is exactly what we need. I love the idea, and I think COP28 under Mariam and Her Excellency and the UAE's leadership, I think that could be the Paris moment for food. And thanks to my sister Agnes Kalibata's leadership with the UN Food System Summit, we actually have all the elements of what we need in this manifesto. And right now, what we need to do is to really see countries, companies, cities, the financial sector step forward with hard commitments based on the national pathways that were developed by or during the UN Food System Summit. But we really need hard, measurable and traceable commitments, and we need transparency and accountability. And I think it's crucial to now bring what we have from COP27, the UN Food System Summit, and now form a coalition of the determined or a high ambition coalition that can start bending the curves and start showing what good looks like. Because that's part of the problem with food system today. Eat Lancet, other scientific work have showed that there are so many co-benefits to be unlocked if we develop integrated, holistic strategies that deliver on net zero, the SDGs, etc. But no one has really done it at scale yet. And as far as I know, the UAE is the only country that has announced that they will integrate food systems into their national determined contributions. And that has to happen across the board. And the second thing, well, innovation is obviously crucial. I think it's as much about systems innovation as introducing new technologies, but it has to be about holistic systems approach. The second thing is a mechanism that allow access to finance, because right now there is no platform, there is no mechanism to access food systems finance. And before countries, cities and other actors on the ground understands that by committing to start developing strategies and practices and policies, that will actually unleash more finance, not less. This won't really fly. And I think COP28 could be the moment in time where we would see countries and other constituencies raising to the challenge, forming these high ambition coalitions, and then a mechanism that ensure access to finance where we blend or align private, public, multilateral and philanthropy funding to actually support transformation on the ground.
Yes.
Totally agree. And to build off what you said, the gap I see in finance has to do with senior debt for projects. So senior debt typically wants a history. And if one's an innovative company, then one typically doesn't have history. And if you're building a big project where there's a lot of capital required, it's hard to build off of that, off all equity. And our financial systems are very efficient, but where there's less efficiency is senior debt for highly innovative companies. So if there are pools of money that fund that, that really allows for scale much faster for innovative solutions.
I want to come to the subject of financing. I mean, I think we can agree that a manifesto ensures enough alignment and coordination across the diversity of different stakeholders. But the scale and the urgency of the required action is really at odds with how quickly value chain actors can change, particularly consumer preferences and purchasing criteria. About 12 animal and plant species make up about 60 to 70% of our total nutrition. Changing that is going to require a significant amount of capital, not all of which can come in the form of senior debt or even from the private sector. So, Your Excellency, I'm curious, building off of calls like the Bridgetown Initiative, and of course, AGRF, Agra's flagship event, called for $200 billion a year to help Africa transform its food system. How are we going to see the magnitude and urgency of financing to meet the magnitude and urgency of the change that's required in the food system?
First of all, Chris, what was really good is that the UAE had basically a 2-year planning period. And so last year it was all about setting the foundation, setting up the COP28 team, ensuring we know the location of COP28, we get that all out of the way. This year it's all about the consultations we have to have with the different stakeholders, and a lot of us here on this panel actually have been having a lot of consultation meetings already, starting from UNGA, 2 at COP27, 1 at COP15 in Montreal. So, and this is ongoing, and we're coming slowly but surely together with a program where we say this would be a food systems program, I'm just going to name it that right now, for COP28. Now, how we started discussing this was the big advocates for food systems transformation, what does success mean for us at COP28? We need to define that first to be able to know what it is we're working towards, to measure whether we are successful or not. And so these meetings have been just amazing to get insights from so many people, so many experts, so many lovers of food systems, and I think we all love our food and we all understand that our food systems are broken. And to get these insights and actually frame something that we say this would be a game changer. And I'm sure all of you heard His Excellency Sultan's speech this morning. He did mention food systems transformation. It wasn't all just about energy. I think that's really important. And I think our role is as well to make sure that all leaders, building on the UN food systems pathways, that the leaders continue advocating for this and pushing for this, because this needs leadership. This really needs leadership. If no one's pushing, it kind of gets forgotten until a crisis happens. And that's exactly what we want to avoid. And this is why these meetings we're having behind doors and enjoying our food while doing that are so important. And we will hopefully be announcing things along the year before COP28, because we all agree that we want to come to COP28 with solutions, concrete solutions, where we take countries that I know Agnes is voicing for and make sure that we're implementing things on the ground there, and we're showcasing at COP28. This is an example that we can now scale up, and that's how you convince the financiers to finance as well. So we need those concrete examples to happen.
Dr. Kalibata, I think we both live in Nairobi. When we think about the current debt load in countries in Africa, you've got this terrible vicious cycle. The effects of climate change mean that yields are lower, so agricultural-led industrialization is harder. More debt is required then to fill the gap, which means they can't invest in agricultural production. So there's almost a negative spiral. There's been a lot of call, as I was mentioning with Bridgetown, to reform Bretton Woods. IMF, World Bank, change the way we think about financing climate. And in Africa, that needs to be centrally around agricultural and food systems. Could you talk a bit about what AGRA and other stakeholders on the continent are doing to mobilize the magnitude of funds that are needed?
So thank you so much. Following the Food Systems Summit, we see two critical pathways to moving food system financing forward from the African perspective, and to build on the fact that actually African countries are significantly struggling following COVID-19. One of them is building on the commitments of heads of state. 47 heads of state from the African continent out of 55 stepped forward and committed to a change in the agriculture, so in our food systems, so that we can transform them. Those pathways, those political statements is something we've taken and really started moving forward into an action agenda for each country. We've now worked with 3 countries, and each of those 3 countries, we've been working on defining the gaps across 3 very critical sectors: food security, which is extremely important today, nutritional security, which is extremely critical, and environment. Africa today, 51% of our agricultural land on the continent is degraded from low use of inputs, and yet definitely the need to produce food. So we are taking these and transforming them into investment plans with 2 perspectives: the public sector investment that recognizes that you're working with smallholder farmers, and that push for public investment is always going to be important, but also to put the system in place. And then the private sector investment that shows the critical opportunities where the private sector can come in and take advantage What's going on? We have a convening, we bring huge amounts of people. Last year we brought about 3,000 people just to discuss Africa's agricultural landscape as we see it coming from the Food Systems Summit. And this is a huge opportunity and huge contribution to the COPs because it comes just two months before COP27, and this time to come 2 months in Tanzania before COP28. And it's a huge opportunity to come and sit with the continent and look at what the opportunities are going to be. And Africa is investing significantly in food. It's going to be in fertilizers. It's going to be in seed systems. It's going to be in feeding ourselves. It's going to be in infrastructure. And it's going to be in irrigation. And I've never seen I've never seen more commitment than I'm seeing from the continent today. I guess catalyzed by everything that has happened around us. But I feel that the continent is now ready for that next step. And yes, it requires a lot of money and lots of partnerships. And my institution, AGRA, is in the midst is trying to bring all these partnerships together.
One of the key things that this money would be used for, of course, is the word transition before we have the word transformation. And mineral fertilizers are a big part of that. The average application rate in Africa is only 20 kilograms or so. It's very low versus a recommended amount that could be even 10 times larger. But Ahmed, you've also been very honest that synthetic fertilizer, and particularly the way that it's made, reliant on petrochemicals, has to be understood and those externalities have to be priced in. Keen to get your thoughts on how we can move towards more regenerative production practices, but still be reliant on some of these technologies and these inputs which we know drive the production of the amount of food we need.
Yeah, I think it's a tough challenge, but we need to learn to basically walk and chew gum at the same time. We need to finance the short-term issues post-COVID-19 in Africa, where that extra ton of fertilizer going to the Ethiopian farmer will have a lot more benefit than extra ton of fertilizer going to the farmer in Iowa, who is already applying 10x as much. That marginal effect of that ton of fertilizer, so you get more crop yield out of there. So I think there's an immediate need on that front because of the food crisis we have in front of us today to support developing economies, and we had that in the Global South, the focus on the Global South in COP27 to really accelerate that purchasing financing gap. You know, I'm giving some examples of countries in sub-Saharan Africa and Africa in general. If you look at their cost of funding, they've gone up 4, 5, 6x. I mean, you're talking about maybe some of them borrowing at 6, 7% a year, and now they're borrowing at 40% a year, right? And so that's a challenge to be able to finance that. So we're working with the International Fertilizer Association and the World Bank to get access to that financing so they can get access to the crops and have a big marginal improvement. But in terms of the financing up long term, which we also need to address, I think that, you know, as David was saying, Walmart, you might find that customer in Walmart pays a little bit extra for that, yes, maybe lower calorie yogurt, but also maybe the lower CO2 footprint yogurt, right? And that solves itself. That's going to be about the transparency in the value chain. But there's also the other element where you're going to find gaps where companies won't work voluntarily. So we need to find that combination of carrots and sticks. US has gone very much on the carrot side. Europe's gone a bit on the stick side in some ways, to find abilities to say where is the easiest way to get from point A to point B. How can we, you know, focus on the areas to decarbonize quickly and move forward a lot of these projects. In our space, the hydrogen space, there have been so many project announcements, hundreds of billions, only 4% have reached FID. So how do we get that move forward is to create that demand, have that supply, and bring that forward. So it's focusing on what is the easiest way to bring that practical solution while innovations continue to.
One of the reasons why this space is so challenging is that we have, at the same time, almost medieval production systems where farmers are not even using row planting, scattering seeds. And then the other end of the spectrum, David, thinking of you, we have the great potential of controlled atmosphere and environment agriculture. We have so many exciting things happening with fermentation in terms of the types of foods and the way that we can grow foods. I'm keen to hear from you. You know, we don't want to overly rely on innovation and technology to solve our problems, right? Because that can have a way of kicking the can down the road. But it is also an important part of reducing the overall environmental and resource footprint to produce food. What technologies are you excited about that you think can contribute meaningfully and at scale and in a reasonable time frame to producing a more resilient and sustainable food system?
Yeah, so happy to talk about that. I'll first comment on something you said earlier, which has to do with diversity. So technology is a big part of the solution, but also human behavior is another part of the solution. So getting people to make the right choices. And I'll share at AeroFarm, so we're a vertical farming company. We were selling to Whole Foods 2 SKUs of leafy greens and increased to 4 to 6 to 8. So different diverse products without cannibalizing other products that were already sold. And it shows, like, when people have choice, they kind of celebrate it, and you could get more energy into a category that's very healthy. So getting people to eat not just calories, but the right nutrition is key, and behavior is a big part of it. But on the technology side, first you think of the enablers like microchips, computing power, robotics, synthetic biology, fermentation. It's a great time to be an entrepreneur, and as a serial entrepreneur, as there are these step changes in technology, you look at where these technologies have high applicability, and I'll give 3 quick examples. So vertical farming was enabled by a microchip. A microchip's in an LED, a light-emitting diode. As the capital costs, the operating costs go down, all of a sudden the opportunities to grow some crops go up. And as the technology advances, the number of crops we could grow in a cost-effective way improves. Another example I'm involved in is precision fermentation, the Every company. We essentially create eggs not through chickens, but through precision fermentation. We put in glucose and yeast, and we create something chemically the same as an egg. And here too, now it's going to like big fermentation to bring down the cost that's chemically the same. Another one, and this gets to human behavior, is insects. So another company I lead at the board level, Aspire. In big towers, we grow level upon level of insects. Here, from a behavioral standpoint, people can't get over the ick factor to eat crickets, but dogs don't mind, so we're selling it to dogs. And as these solutions become more available and as human behavioral changes, then there are great proteins and great ways to feed humanity. So I'm optimistic that a lot of these solutions are going to be able to do a lot more with less.
So there's technology innovation, and very excited about vertical farming, fermentation, insects, but there's also system innovation. And I'd really be interested, Dr. Stordalen, to hear your thoughts on how we can use COP28 to highlight the kind of systems innovation that is required to accelerate, to amplify, and assure the delivery of this manifesto that we were just speaking to.
Thank you, Chris. And it's important to remind ourselves that the Eat Lancet 1 Commission showed that it is possible to feed 10 billion people enough healthy food within safe planetary boundaries with existing technologies. So we need to make sure that we are not using innovation and technology as kind of a way to slip off the hook. We need to change the way we produce and consume and obviously waste and lose food and the way it's driving social inequalities in the supply chains. And we need to do that, and that means changing the rules of the game, reforming institutions and the dynamics between the actors. And we cannot avoid talking about the enormous vested interests in maintaining status quo. So that's why transparency and accountability will become so important, and why governments also need to set clear vision based on scientific targets. You briefly mentioned Eat Lancet 2, I think, but we are now doing an updated commission, which is, I'm calling it an interim IPCC for food, because the IPCC is not doing it yet, and there's nothing else out there. But obviously this is something that we hope that the UN will take on. And FAO is now also working on something that is called a net zero roadmap for food systems, which is great. So that will help inform these strategies. But unless we are able to do an inclusive consultative process, like the Food System Summit was a brilliant example on, how many countries did a food system dialogues, Agnes? It was
193 actually.
Yeah, exactly. So it happened basically everywhere, and it was a way to bring all the stakeholders together. And unless we are able to get inputs, this is not going to fly. What is happening in the Netherlands at the moment, where angry farmers are raging in the streets, that is something that no country would like to see happening. So really navigating trade-offs and maximizing synergies and compensating the losers will be important discussions, and that is why these holistic policies is needed. And my final point is, building on what you said, Agnes, on finance. There is so much money in the system, but right now it's flowing to all the wrong places when it comes to food systems. And that's why we have initiated with partners like UNEP, something called the Good Food Finance Network, which is basically about getting a systems approach out to investors, private and public and multilateral, and starting to align what's already there, starting to see the systems risks and investing in systems opportunities. Ask any investor in the energy space, what is the future of energy? Everybody will tell you the same answer, it's renewable. What is that answer for food? They don't know. So getting much more clarity and applying the same thinking with the true cost, the true value of food into investments, and start changing capital flows towards what is promoting the health of people and planet will also be a really important solution here.
Chris, could I just add
Yes,
something
yes,
there?
please.
So on Gunhild's word, innovations also in the systems-based approach. I just want to share with you something we did in the UAE. You all know the UAE is not an agriculture country, but we import most of our food, actually more than 90% of our food. Now we've also got farmers. We have 35,000 farms in the UAE. And you can imagine, they come to me and they say, we need to put up barriers, trade barriers. We need to put a protection policy for our local produce. Microphone's on. Hello, hello.
Hello? I think we're all out.
We're all out?
Hello?
There we whisper into
Hello,
Chris'
hello.
ear.
We're back.
All right.
We're back.
So what we did was the following. I said, I need to create a market for them, a market where they're not competing against our traders. And so I basically got together some of our big national companies, such as ADNOC. And I sat with Sultan. I said, Sultan, can we agree that certain food items that I know that our farmers are growing in the UAE, can they at least by 50%, or can they at least by the end of this year make sure that 50% of those food produces are sourced locally? Now, I can work on a policy for it, but that's going to take time. But can I get your consent on this? So he said, I'm in. Then I called the army. Then I called the police. Okay, these are all big national companies that order a lot of food. So we basically got together 5 or 6 of these entities. Are you all hearing me, by the way? You're breaking up a bit, right? Okay.
It seems to be coming in and out.
There's another microphone here.
There we go.
Let's hope this works now.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, it was literally a matter of 3-4 days before the annual government meeting that I then personally called all the CEOs and all the director generals of these big organizations, and they all said, yes, that makes absolute sense. So I got them all to sign, right? It was in front of the leadership of the UAE. They all signed that by the end of this year, 50% of a list of food items are going to be sourced locally, going to 70% next year, going to 100% by 2030. So this is just an idea that I'm giving you, that governments need to think out of the box. And don't just always say, no, we can't because of this policy. No, think of these kind of initiatives, because there's always a way out.
There's huge power in public procurement, the volume to incentivize change upstream. And it's interesting, I think we have 2 different examples. In the global north, you want to introduce new fermented foods that are built on a mushroom substrate that people don't necessarily have any exposure to, but we need to actually change consumer preferences. In the global south, often there are great diets full of beans and leafy greens and whole grains, which consumers are changing from to go to high carbohydrate, high sugar, salt, and fat diets. How do we use policy, and maybe it is public procurement, to make sure that we are also taking on the demand side? We've talked a lot about the supply side, and that's where the environmental focus is. But unless you have consumers that want these foods, farmers will not grow them, commodity traders will not trade them, processors won't process them. So what is the role of government in changing, nudging consumer preferences in purchasing? And I'd love to hear from you, but also sort of in the US example and then also in Africa.
Awareness, 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 and looking at what you can grow sustainably in your own country and bringing that to chefs, and chefs exploring what can be done with that food. I have a great example of this, salicornia. Most of you probably don't know what that is. It looks like an asparagus. It's a salty asparagus. It grows in the desert using salt water. It's a very nutritious vegetable, basically. We got some chefs to come and put it in their smoothies, their crackers, their crisps, and now we have the private sector. Instead of putting salt, they're actually, they've now contracted a few smallholder farmers, again this is the pilot right now, to actually use that as an ingredient.
Great example. Thank you.
Then the Honorable Minister is talking about awareness, 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 and I'm like, it's awareness for Africa, it's awareness and avoidance. We still have an opportunity. We have a huge part of the continent that, especially rural areas, that are not exposed to all this fast food stuff. And for us, development is about getting more into that. So I guess from where I'm sitting and where we are, it's also recognizing that that's something we probably need to protect our societies from. We have the opportunity of knowing what it could do to society. Yes, we do have that in our cities, so awareness and ensuring that people understand that our health, our bodies are built on good food, but also it costs us a whole lot when we don't invest in it the right way. And just trying to protect the population that is not yet exposed to what's going on, to ensure that we really stay on the right side of investing in the right food for people, I think would be great.
So, Chris, to your question, if we back to incentivizing the right behavior, so good food, if like in the US there's food stamps. The USDA gives tens of billions of dollars to the poor for food stamps. Those food stamps could buy donuts, nachos, Coca-Cola, things like that. Why? Like here, and on one hand we want personal liberties, sure, but don't do it with government money. So that money can be earmarked towards healthy food. And some cities do, so you get those dollars go further for healthy food versus unhealthy food. On just something else that Gunhild said earlier about a system approach, the other side of that is like where you don't have a system-based approach, that's where all of a sudden bad actors could have a competitive advantage. And that's where governments and systems want to avoid that. As an example, like if we at AeroFarms use 5% of the water to grow a plant, but someone else uses like 90% more water, then if that's cheaper to do, they're at a competitive advantage for doing something where water is subsidized and it's not really in the calculus. So back to what you were saying earlier, in so much as we could either price the externalities or somehow governments with their purchasing power, and I love what you said about getting the big purchasing power to drive change and reward good actors, this is the system-based approach that we need.
Dr. Stordalen.
Perfect segue, because that's one of the areas that we are doubling down on as EAT, and also as a coalition of the determined coming out of the UN Food System Summit, called the Food Forward Consortium, and it's basically about supporting and empowering cities around the world in Global South, in Global North, to help set science-based targets based on their regional or local context, and start providing more planetary health diets, healthy, sustainable diets to their city dwellers, and also make a pull for farmers in the rural districts. Because what we have seen now during COVID with the war in Ukraine, we have seen how incredibly vulnerable the long global complex supply chains are, and building resilience is absolutely essential, and part of that will be more local production for local consumption. So just reinforcing the importance of public procurement power, but also zoning, and really supporting cities as driver of demand generation, because today 70%, 80% of the world's food is destined for consumption in cities, and that has not been prioritized. We have seen how fast they have been moving on climate, and now food is the next big thing. So I think cities is also absolutely key to think about for COP28.
So I think we have many of the pillars of the manifesto that have been covered here, and I know that should we actually emerge with one at the end of COP28, it will be in large part because of actors like yourselves. So I want to thank you so much for all the ideas, the specific examples, and the insights that you've shared. And onwards, as this is an intergenerational shift, and the COPs are only annual milestones on the overall journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Fascinating. Yes, it's be careful down. Thank you all so much. Again, a fascinating discussion there in terms of what's happening. Almost making us hungry, I know, but we have to stay the course here. We have a few more sessions to do yet. But very, very interesting conversation about food, about resources, and again, bringing back in the importance of energy, of water, putting all of this together, because it's something I think we need to think a lot more about. I mean, not alone do we have energy poverty in the world, of course, you know, we still, in some areas of the world, and exacerbated by some climate conditions too, we have food shortages in many areas. But it was interesting there how, you know, I think everybody said we really need to be taking short-term steps to actually move forward to make sure that there is adequate food, to make sure that everything is in place. And it's not about waiting around for the grand solution, so to speak. There's so much that can be done, and I think we heard there some of the initiatives that are being done, initiatives that are making a huge difference. Focus, of course, on the global south. That's something we have to do. And again, I think we're hearing it time and time again. The financial system needs to be revamped. It certainly needs to be looked at again, and it needs to be looked at in all areas. So from food, we're going to move on shortly now to take a look at what's happening in really securing that sustainable energy pathway to net zero. And we're going to hear from some companies at the very forefront of technology that are going to help lead these energy transitions. But before we get started, let's take a little look at a video from one of our
Hello, I'm Juliette Foster, coming to you from Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, a global initiative championed by the UAE and backed by the clean energy powerhouse Masdar. All week we'll be bringing you the latest news and interviews with the major players, plus analysis of the day's developments. On today's ADSW Live, we're focusing on pathways to net zero and especially the need for a whole society, whole planet approach to delivering a clean energy transition. A quick look at where we are right now before we bring in our first guest.
Since the start of time, each new energy revolution has impacted us all. Fire introduced energy-rich food and boosted human evolution. Agriculture led to human settlement, towns, and then cities. Fossil fuels ushered in massive growth, but also unimagined environmental damage. Today, as we plot our urgent shift from fossil fuels to renewable energies, we know the energy transition can only succeed if it includes all of us. North and South, East and West have and have not communities developing and developed economies, the major CO2 emitters, and the communities with the smallest carbon footprint. Everyone must have a seat at the table. As the UAE's Special Envoy for Climate Change announced at last year's ADSW, our goal is to hold back emissions, not to hold back progress or economic development. An inclusive green energy transition will require engagement, expertise, and funding across the energy spectrum: solar, wind, hydro, and clean hydrocarbons. An ambition backed by investment from Masdar, a key enabler of the UAE's vision to drive clean energy growth, accelerate an equitable energy transition, and to be at the forefront to solve the climate challenges. To deliver the energy transition we all urgently need, to share in the environmental, social, and economic benefits that will follow, We must all be included. All sectors, all industries, everyone around the world.
The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, was drafted 30 years ago, back in 1992. Since its first day, it has championed an inclusive approach to tackling climate change. Well, our next guest is Nigel Topping. He's the UK's high-level climate champion, and he now joins us. Nigel, it's good to see you. Thank you for taking the time out to be here. So how does it feel to be a climate champion? What does it mean to you personally?
Well, I mean, it's a huge honour, first of all, to be appointed by the president of the COP. So I was appointed by the UK Prime Minister when the UK took on COP26 presidency. And I've just stepped down after 2 COPs. So it's a huge honour, and it's an amazing job, right? Because the mandate is to work with everybody who's not a national government, which means businesses, large and small, banks, investors, cities, universities, to drive ambition and to really focus on action. I'm quite pushy, and my background's in business, so it's nice to have a mandate which is just
guessed you were pushy.
To push people. So it's great, and we made a lot of progress in the last few years of really raising ambition and getting much more specific about the actions that people need to take.
But it sounds like you're a connector, bringing together people who perhaps in other circumstances wouldn't link up, but you're the glue, you're the one who holds them together, and above all, make sure that the conversations continue even when you leave the role. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, connecting is really important. I mean, we talk a lot about radical collaboration, about getting people who maybe wouldn't normally talk together, but this is about a systemic change in the global economy. So if we don't collaborate, we're going to do it too slowly. And yeah, in terms of making sure it carries on, that's one of the reasons why the UN decided there would always be 2 champions, so there's always an overlap. So I worked with Gonzalo Munoz from Chile, the COP25 champion, and then Dr. Mahmoud Mohidin from Egypt, the COP27 champion. And we've built a team to support future champions, which is already working to support the new Emirati champion, Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak, who's a great choice, by the way.
Fantastic. Now look, earlier you talked about the COP26 in Glasgow. What do you think has changed since then? You talked about collaboration. Are we seeing more of that since that time?
So I think a lot of things have changed. One thing is that basically we've all agreed, I mean, not everybody, but way past a sort of tipping point majority, that we've got to get to net zero as quickly as possible. So that's one thing that's changed. Second of all, private finance is in the room in a big way. You know, we co-founded with Mark Carney the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero. That's over 500 banks, asset owners, asset managers, insurers.
Just to clarify, Mark Carney is a former governor of the Bank of England.
Yeah, former governor of the Bank of England, and was a special envoy to the Secretary General of the United Nations and the advisor to the UK Prime Minister. And so we worked together to create this big group, all of whom committed to put in place plans to finance to net zero. And so since Glasgow, when the big headline of 130 trillion, but that's just assets under management, all those organisations have been putting in place plans to decarbonise their loan books or their pension portfolios, which they're now implementing. That's a massive shift of capital. I think the other thing that's happened is we've got very clear architecture of implementation, what we call the Breakthrough Agenda, which was launched in Glasgow, and then the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda launched in Sharm el-Sheikh. So we know what we've got to do by 2030. And so the really exciting thing for me now about this UAE presidency is to really operationalise that at scale, and with many more people who maybe haven't always been involved in the climate conversation, but are ministers of energy or industry, not of environment, because it's those ministers who have to make the policy changes and work with the private sector to drive the investment.
But it seems that more people are coming around the table, which is a really positive thing. And you mentioned there the COP28 happening later this year, of course, in Dubai. But what would you say that we need to be doing differently compared to previous COPs? Because you are a bit of a COP veteran, so you've got that insider's view.
Well, I think first thing is to respectfully do the homework to know what's happened before and build on it. And I'm really encouraged for everything I've seen. The Emiratis have put together a great team, and they have been doing their homework, and bring that kind of humility to recognise the complexity and build on it. So that, I think that's already a tick. But secondly, I would say give people their swim lanes early. So define the thematic days in the next few weeks. By the end of February, say, because we're talking about trying to mobilise line ministers and CEOs who have the most jam-packed diaries of any human beings in the world. Give them their swim lanes, tell them which 2 or 3 days you want them to turn up, and tell them what you want to turn up with. Don't tell them that you don't want them to turn up to tell everybody else what to do, but turn up saying what you're doing, what money you're putting on the table, what projects you've already done, what projects you're committing to, and set a high bar for ambition and mobilise everybody. That architecture's emerging, but I think it could be really cemented this year.
Yeah, because this is always the problem, isn't it? That COPs tend to overrun. Everybody bites their nails down, but we need to keep it on track to deliver.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I would distinguish between the multilateral negotiations, which is formally what the COP is, and it's a negotiation. Negotiations always overrun. That's part of the dynamics of negotiations, right? You have the one-upmanship till midnight, and then you go over a little bit. So they never finish on time, a day or two late. So that's okay. It's normal dynamics. But what I'm talking about is what happens outside of those formal negotiations, which is less. The negotiations require 196 countries to agree every comma. It's a very high bar of consensus. In the real economy, you don't have to get everyone to agree. You have to get, a government, a financier, and a lead implementer to agree, and then amazing stuff happens. So that sort of dynamic implementation track is also very present at the COPs, and actually hasn't tended to get as much coverage as the negotiations. And I think that we will see the world pay more attention. There's still some important things to be negotiated, but you shouldn't be under the illusion that that's where all of the interesting stuff is happening. Because a lot of the interesting stuff is happening alongside the negotiations.
Absolutely, and it continues when everything's actually folded up. But Nigel, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. A pleasure speaking to you. I know that you've got a very busy schedule ahead of you, so I will let you go. But that was Nigel Topping. He is the UK's high-level climate champion, and a very good champion he is too. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant. We need look no further than Abu Dhabi's national energy company, TAQA, for an example of how industry and infrastructure are collaborating to help deliver a clean energy transition. Well, Omar Al-Khashmi is the executive director of TAQA's transmission and distribution business, and he's perfectly placed to explain how that collaboration works both in principle and in practice. Omar, thank you so much for being here. It's good to see you. Look, can you just start with a short explanation of what transmission and distribution actually means and how you apply it at TAQA?
Okay, so thank you very much. First of all, it's really great to be here, especially with the caliber that we have in this week in Abu Dhabi. Again, my name is Omar Al-Hashmi. I'm responsible for the transmission distribution, which is one of the three main pillars in TAQA, together with oil and gas and generation. Today, TAQA is one of the largest integrated utility companies in the Middle East, Europe and Africa. We're kind of like number 10 by regulated asset base. So from transmission distribution business line, what we're referring to is all the assets from the moment the power or watt is generated all the way to the consumer, including the servicing them by billing and collection and the customer service part. So that's the part that we're focusing on.
Okay, so thank you for that. Now, given what you've just said, why is infrastructure so important in delivering the energy transition? We're talking about energy transition, but we now have to make it happen. So where does infrastructure fit into that transition equation?
I'm really glad we're actually talking about that. I mean, traditionally the media has been focusing so much on the generation, like is that energy coming from hydrogen, from solar, from wind? And to a certain extent on how we consume the energy, like, there might be an LED technology that consumes less, or a certain equipment that's actually more efficient in using it. And everybody always assumed that the infrastructure is there to deliver it. But reality is, infrastructure is not there to deliver it, and there's a lot of bottlenecks in the system. So, I mean, depending on different data sources, I mean, we believe that the world needs between 15 to 30 trillion dollars of investments in the transmission and distribution up to 2050 to enable all that energy and green electrons to flow. There's few trends causing that massive investments. From one side, we need to be able to connect all these new generation assets to the grid. Yeah, so that's one major trend we see. We also noticed that, for example, I mean, electricity as a market is gaining momentum and gaining space. Like, for example, today in Africa, 40% of the population is connected, but there's very strong ambition for that percentage to grow significantly. So basically the market of electricity is actually growing. There's also the notion that many parts of the grids in different parts of the world are very old, and requires major investments and refurbishments and replacements to allow it to be catered to deal with all these different changes in the energy mix. And there's the reality of electric vehicles and batteries. So reality is there is so much investments needed, and people assume it's just there and it's already there. But if we don't really take care of it, we're going to have an issue. And we think that investments in transmission distribution is as important as it is in the generation side. So.
My sense of what you've just said is that what you're talking about here is changing our perception of what that infrastructure is all about, effectively redefining it, redefined by reality.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, again, when you think about renewable energies, the nature of the electrons is different. There is intermittency. Sometimes the sun is on, sometimes the sun is off. There's a lot of technological requirements to enable us to fully maximize the value of the renewables. And the technologies of the past needs to be upgraded to allow us to do that, basically.
Given that, how is TAQA's transmission and distribution business prepared to invest in infrastructure? Because the layout on this is phenomenal.
Absolutely. I mean, if we refer to some of some of our announcements about our ambition to invest, actually we made we talked about how much we need to invest. I mean, in the transmission distribution side, we see that that we need in our territory is about more than $10 billion in investments just to be able to keep up with all these trends. And here you're talking about a city that is fairly well developed and built up, but you still need that big investment. And if you look at other parts of the world, the investments are going to be much bigger. I do see it every year. There's an increase in requirements from a CapEx point of view. These are projects to meet our customers' needs and their natural growth, but also to connect with all the ambitious projects that UAE is doing to bring more electrons, like, connecting the nuclear power plants, connecting the new PV plants. And we believe that we are an important stakeholder and partner to support UAE and Abu Dhabi to meet its objectives.
But also as well, very briefly, we've been talking or referencing demand-side management, DSM. Now, it's seen as a key part of decarbonising the energy sector. So, in very simple terms, what is DSM? Why is it so important to that decarbonisation process? And more specifically, what is TAQA doing within that space?
That's a very good question. Thanks so much. So DSM is basically a notion of how we can consume smarter, right? It has many different pillars associated with it. Some elements might be about better awareness. Like sometimes if you just know that you don't need to keep the heater on the whole day, if you only need to take a shower once a day, that reduces your consumption. If you know that if you keep the fridge a little bit open, it increases consumption. So part of it is just knowing the proper way to consume the power without really affecting your lifestyle. So that's one big important part in DSM. But also retrofit is a very big agenda for us. Reality is, the governments, they're doing a lot of effort to try to improve the codes of building. Now you see the new buildings are built in a much more efficient way, and insulation and all that kind of stuff. But reality is, a lot of our cities have been built a long time ago. So although a lot of these regulations support the new building, we need to have solution for the older building. So retrofitting becomes a major item from demand-side management program, where we see a lot of promises of deploying technology in a very smart way to actually provide savings to the consumer and to the environment. So what does TAQA is doing about that? We're doing quite a bit, actually. We created a company called ADES, Abu Dhabi Energy Services, which acts like a super ESCO or a market maker for the energy service market. So what they do is they try to develop projects, and they create a tender in the market, and they provide financing solution, because some of these deals are non-financeable from a traditional banking point of view. So we provide that platform that allows that business to happen. Demand-side management is very good from an economic point of view. It creates jobs, it reduces cost, it employs people. So it's actually a very good thing that you can do, where it's actually a win-win-win to everybody.
But Omar, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. But that was Omar Al-Hashmi, who's the Executive Director of TAQA's Transmission and Distribution Business. Presidents, prime ministers, business leaders and policymakers were amongst the attendees for the opening ceremony of ADSW on Monday. Launched in 2008, ADSW is committed to accelerating the world's sustainable development. This year's event was opened by Dr. Sultan Ahmed Al Jaber, the UAE's Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology, and the newly named chairman of COP28.
This year's ADSW carries a special significance, because it is the year that we host COP28 in a critical decade for climate progress.
The Zayed Sustainability Prize Awards also took place today. 10 winners have been announced in 5 categories. We'll be talking to some of the winners later this week. And in climate industry news, the US government and Masdar have signed a deal for Masdar to develop 15 gigawatts of clean energy in the US by 2035. The $20 billion project is the first phase of PACE, that is the Partnership for Accelerating Clean Energy. Internationally, the UAE is supporting and implementing clean energy projects on 6 continents. That's all we have time for. Stay with us. We'll be back after this short break. Watete of Ghana is the UN Secretary-General's special envoy to the Horn of Africa. She cares deeply about climate, peace and security, especially how they're connected and most especially about how they're protected in the Horn of Africa region. I'm delighted to say that she joins us now. It's very good to see you. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. What I'd like to know is a little bit more about your role, what it is that you do and how your passion informs that.
Thank you for having me. The role of the UN Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa is a role that focuses more on the political peace and security challenges of the region. The region covers the area that involves member states of IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. And so basically we're talking about 8 countries: Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, Sudan, South Sudan, and Djibouti. And within this very diverse region, which we refer to as the Greater Horn of Africa, you have some of the countries that are on the forefront of the climate crisis. And when I say forefront of the climate crisis, you can see the impact on countries, on communities, and on their development trajectory. And even though climate change is not necessarily a trigger of conflict, it can create the situation that causes tensions between communities that ultimately, if those tensions are not well managed, then they can drive existing conflicts or start new ones.
So it can actually complicate things, basically.
Yes.
I mean, I do want to look at the impact of climate change on these communities, but before we go there, I want you to explain to me the link between climate and security, because as somebody who works in the media, it is a connection which is either ignored or under-explained.
Well, if we bear in mind that the climate crisis, being that this is a man-made crisis, essentially is a trigger of security challenges globally, then that's our starting point. And that's not necessarily within the Horn of Africa. But within the Horn, especially with the countries that I've just mentioned, you've seen this manifesting in different ways. So for instance, in the area between Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia, referred to as the Mandera Triangle, we've seen 5 years of consecutive drought. 5 years of consecutive drought in communities that are pastoral. And so essentially what that means is that their animals no longer have food and water. The areas in which they used to graze are no longer fit for that purpose. The pressure is going to create climate migrants. When they move into other communities and have to change their lifestyle from the economic activity that they have been used to for a very long time, and now try to adapt to other things, that in and of itself creates its own difficulties. And so if you just take that intersection between these 3 countries, and you see what has happened over the last 5 years, and by the way, it doesn't look as if the next rain from the prognosis that we have so far is going to be any different. Can you imagine what that happens going forward when you don't find ways of bringing into play adaptation, resilience building, and alternative livelihoods. When people have no choices, what do? They begin to fight over the little that they have left.
You actually answered the question I was going to put to you about the impact on communities, so thank you so much for explaining that. But what happens if we don't take meaningful action now? We can talk about it, but the words have to have substance if we're to avoid the disaster scenarios.
Well, that's the reason why the UN Secretary General says that we should understand that we are in a crisis situation and we are failing at addressing that crisis, and which is the reason why we need to bring more seriousness to this issue. Because what you're seeing in the Horn is on the front line of people who have been impacted. Now, I know that last year, because of the floods in Pakistan, that is what is in the public's memory about what the climate crisis can cause to countries, and indeed has caused to Pakistan. But it's manifesting in different ways in other parts of the world. And on the African continent, in the Horn of Africa, in the Sahel belt, this is where you're seeing the same kind of crisis, the same kind of tragedy unfolding in a different way from what happened in Pakistan. So the creation of the new fund to deal with issues of loss and damage is timely, is necessary, because the loss and damage is happening today. Now, I've talked about the areas in my region which are facing drought, but on the flip side, in South Sudan, you can see now that the way in which the crisis has manifested there is extensive flooding. That hasn't had the same kind of airtime as the situation in Pakistan. But there are states within South Sudan, which is a country that in itself is transitioning and trying to move out of conflict, where last year's rainwaters have not receded. And so communities that used to be agricultural, again, some that used to be pastoral, are not able to access the resources they have lived on. That's the urgency of now. And that's why this has to be dealt with now.
That's the point as well, that basically the environment or environmental concerns are feeding into geopolitical tensions from which nobody benefits effectively. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
But in terms of initiatives that are happening within the Horn of Africa itself, are there things which are really getting you excited and which make you feel that perhaps this negative tide can be reversed?
I must say that many of the countries in the region, Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, are dealing with this problem themselves. I mean, they've started to deal with it from a perspective of government policy and investing resources. But the resources available are not enough to meet the scale of the challenge. The member states of IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development themselves, last year at a side event that we co-organized, we meaning the United Nations, my office, co-organized with IGAD on dealing with the climate crisis, agreed to establish a coordinating mechanism in order for them to be able to exchange across the region, because this is not an issue that respects national borders, so that there can be a regional response. And so one of the things that we want to look at this year is to crowd and finance for that initiative, so that the member states that have been proactive can deal with it. In Ethiopia, for instance, over the last 4 years, we've had the Green Legacy Initiative of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, where they focused on reforestation in a major way. And you can see that it is beginning to impact weather systems in a positive way. So it tells you that once you apply resources to try to work towards real solutions, you actually can effect change. And I think that's the most promising thing about this whole situation. We can make a difference if we pay attention now.
And let me stay with the idea of actually making a difference, because you are a highly experienced negotiator at regional, national and international level. So how do you think you can bring those skills to bear at Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week and going forward to help build that consensus and drive for the COP28? We talk about cooperation. How can we achieve that given these monumental events which are happening right now and also further down the line? What can you do to make that difference?
Well, one of the things that we have done, and we started with COP27, was to make sure that we were able to work with the countries to bring them together to have a consensus on this initiative. For the rest of this year and beyond, I am going to continue on making sure that that agreed initiative begins to get the attention of international donors and funding partners, so that we can make sure that some of the key projects that we have developed under that initiative already can attract the financing to be able to implement them. Because we can talk about doing things, of course you need to have an appropriate coordinating framework. The hard part of getting member states to accept that and to see the benefit of that has happened already. So now it's about making sure that the things that we talked about, the things that we identified, now it's to deliver on actually making them happen.
I have a feeling that you will, but Hannah, we have to leave it there. That was Hannah Sterwa-Teta of Ghana. She is the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa. Small island developing states is what the UN calls those low sea level island countries that are already feeling the effects of warmer and higher water. At COP26 in Glasgow, Tuvalu captured the world's attention on the dangers faced by islands all over the world. We are sinking, but we are all sinking, Tuvalu's foreign minister announced, standing knee-deep in water. He called for urgent international cooperation to meet the climate targets set in Paris. Well, James E. Harris lives on Vanuatu, a South Pacific nation made up of roughly 80 islands. He's also Vanuatu's honorary consul to the UK. He attended the IRENA assembly here in Abu Dhabi this weekend as part of Vanuatu's climate delegation. He sat down with my colleague Christina Millman and told her that while Vanuatu is also already feeling the impacts of climate change, its government sees itself as part of the solution instead of a victim.
So it's actually being run through the United Nations General Assembly. We're seeking a referral to the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion. And the importance of this is that it will give us a set of guidelines for future reference, just to acknowledge and establish that climate change does exist, that certain commitments have been made that may not be being fully addressed as we speak, and to also acknowledge that there are countries that are disproportionately affected by climate change compared to their contribution to climate.
Now, you speak about being disproportionately affected, yet you are very keen to avoid any kind of labeling associated with being a victim.
Correct. I'm very keen, that's why I choose my words carefully. We're all victims of climate change, and so Vanuatu cannot sit there and put its hands up and just be a victim. I think we have to be part of the solution. We have to be part of a narrative that's positive and shows the way forward. And I believe how we can do that is because we're an ecologically pristine, carbon negative, non-aligned, peaceful archipelago of 83 islands, and I think we have the potential to be the poster child for climate finance. We have costed in detail, sector by sector, what requirements we have for addressing climate change in terms of mitigation.
I'm very interested in that, because this is the first case that I've heard of where there's actually a number associated with the cost of mitigating the impact of climate change. How did you work that out, and what's the number for Vanuatu?
This is a good question. We last year issued a document which is our nationally determined contribution. It's revised and enhanced. This sets out sector by sector exactly what we need to address. So whether it's in forestry, it even extends to cultural aspects, tourism, all the areas that are impacted by climate change. And we've costed and detailed what needs to be done, how. The sum total is $1.2 billion US. We've put that figure out there. We've committed to be carbon zero in energy by 2030. So the figures are there, our commitments are there, our goals are there, but we do need help to get there. And that is why I am here. I'm supporting our climate change minister at IRENA, and this is my first exposure to the Atlantic Council, which is a fabulous opportunity for me to extend from the government sector a little bit more into the philanthropic and private sector. So I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to be here and to evangelize why Vanuatu should be ring-fenced and protected and become, as I say, a poster child for climate change.
Great, and we're very grateful that you made time to speak with us. Thank you very much.
That's all we have time for today on ADSW Live. Join us again tomorrow, and thanks for watching.
We need to protect, restore, and invest in nature.
The clock is ticking. We are in the fight of our lives, and we are losing.
Reaching global net zero emissions represents the greatest market transformation with the greatest economic promise since the Industrial Revolution.
It is time to act, and we have to act now. We have the collective capacity to transform.
Abu Dhabi's bold vision for sustainable energy is transforming this nation and inspiring our region.
Of people from all over the world, from every generation, from every part of society, in a common effort.
We, in the UAE, extend an open invitation to the world and welcome you all to partner with us in shaping a united vision of a shared, positive, progressive future.
Just like our founding fathers, we need you to be part of our national goal to honor, to protect, and to conserve our natural resources. These resources are our prosperity and our future. On land, in the sea, our forefathers lived and survived in this environment. They were able to do so because they recognized the need to conserve it, to take from it only what they needed to live and to preserve it for succeeding generations. We shouldn't lose the time before us so that the future does not ignore us. Save energy. Use it wisely.
Geopolitical tensions have brought energy security back to the top of the global agenda. The urgent need for climate action and tangible efforts to achieve net zero makes it clear we need a cohesive vision from energy leaders. How will the crisis in Ukraine reshape energy markets? What will it take to tackle today's energy security needs while ensuring an inclusive, sustainable future? As the world looks to the UAE and COP28, join the Atlantic Council Global Energy Forum in Abu Dhabi to set the energy agenda for 2023. Learn more at acenergyforum.org.
possibilities allow us to make a difference. We all need light to see a future that does not grow dark on us, to build special moments and help nature be part of our homes. We all need water to allow ourselves a resourceful life, so that every water drop saved can make our world abundant. We shouldn't lose the time before us, so that the future does not ignore us. Save energy, save water, use it wisely.
The world needs more low-carbon energy, and ADNOC is committed to meeting that demand. We are taking real steps to drive real change, committing $15 billion to pioneer lower carbon solutions, and increasing our investment in renewables and hydrogen. These steps will reduce our carbon intensity by 25% by 2030 and advance our net zero by 2050 ambition. ADNOC, energy for life.
The sun shines bright over the desert, and deep water wells yielded a source of life. Every drop generously offered to inspire the old and young to always act right. Progress soon ignited on the shores of endless waves that delivered innovation to desalinate and build sources of fresh water, powered by solar energy, delivering advanced solutions with technology intelligently purposed, giving rise to a sustainable city. Abu Dhabi, a city that acts responsibly for the globe and for all, delivering advanced solutions to give back all that is borrowed. Save water. Use it wisely.
Small island developing states account for less than 1% of global carbon emissions. Yet they hold great influence on global climate action. Most SIDS have set a path towards a 100% renewables future. That is crucial for their survival, livelihoods, energy security, and socio-economic growth. SIDS' political commitment to renewables is unwavering, but access to financing remains a major constraint. Due to their limited size and administrative challenges, small islands often struggle to attract the investments needed. IRENA coordinates a framework for action called the SIDS Lighthouses Initiative. Together with 31 partners, IRENA drives actions to accelerate SIDS' energy transition and to implement their nationally determined contributions to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. At the end of 2020, 5.9 gigawatts of renewables were installed in all SIDS. With increased financial and technical support, SIDS can increase their climate resilience.
Sustainable energy is transforming this nation and inspiring our region.
Of people from all over the world, from every generation, from every part of society, in a common effort.
We in the UAE extend an open invitation to the world and welcome you all to partner with us in shaping a united vision of a shared, positive, progressive future.
Esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The opening ceremony will commence shortly.